Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. Alice found herself standing on a narrow trail deep within an unfamiliar forest. The trees around her loomed tall and twisted, their branches forming a dark canopy that blocked out the sky. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, and she felt an eerie sense of awareness this was a dream. But knowing she was dreaming did little to quell the rising tide of anxiety within her. Her legs felt leaden, refusing to respond to her frantic desire to move, to run away from the inexplicable fear tightening around her chest. From behind she heard the faint, echoing call of her mother's voice. It was distant yet unmistakable, carrying an edge of concern that only heightened her panic. "Alice, come back," the voice called out, sending shivers down her spine. She tried to turn to see her mother's face, but her body remained frozen, as if the forest itself held her captive. The path ahead was barely discernible, a mere suggestion of a way forward through the dense undergrowth. Despite the fear gnawing at her, Alice felt an inexplicable certainty that she was on the right path. Each step she took felt like wading through a viscous, invisible force that resisted her every move. Around her, the forest seemed alive in the most unnatural way. The gnarled roots of the trees twisted and curled into the murky ground, resembling distorted, half-formed human figures. Shadows danced at the edge of her vision, flickering like ghostly apparitions. As she continued to struggle against the oppressive force holding her back, the forest seemed to close in around her, the trees leaning closer, as if whispering secrets among themselves. The voice of her mother grew fainter, merging with the eerie symphony of the forest, a chorus of rustling leaves and distant, unidentifiable sounds. Alice's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a desperate plea for escape. The dream teetered on the edge of nightmare, every detail saturated with a surreal sense of dread. The forest was a labyrinth of twisted perceptions and creeping unease, and Alice was caught in its grasp, unable to wake from the dream or shake the feeling that something terrible was lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for the moment when she would finally turn around and confront it. The path before Alice was barely discernible, a thin thread winding through the oppressive gloom of the forest. Yet, despite the overwhelming sense of dread, she felt a strange certainty that she was heading in the right direction. Each step she took was tentative, her feet sinking slightly into the soft, marshy ground that seemed to pulse with an unsettling life of its own. Everything around her felt unreal, as if she were walking through a distorted reflection of reality. The trees towered over her, their twisted trunks and gnarled branches forming grotesque shapes against the dim light filtering through the canopy. Their roots snaked into the murky depths of a nearby swamp, disappearing into the dark, still waters that exuded an almost tangible sense of malevolence. As Alice moved forward, she noticed something deeply disturbing about the roots. In the eerie half-light, they seemed to take on the shapes of blurred human figures, their forms twisted and contorted in silent agony. Some appeared to reach out with spectral hands, their fingers elongating and merging with the fibrous roots, as if they were trying to escape from some unseen horror that held them captive beneath the swamp's surface. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and an unidentifiable, faint whispering seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath her feet. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching her, waiting for her to falter. She could feel the weight of its gaze, a crushing presence that bore down on her from all sides. Despite the terror that gnawed at her insides, Alice pressed on, driven by a deep, instinctual knowledge that she had to keep moving. The path was treacherous, and her every step was careful, calculated. The further she ventured, the more the forest seemed to close in around her, the trees leaning inward as if to confine her within their sinister embrace. The human-like figures within the roots grew more distinct the deeper she went, their faces, though blurred, contorted in expressions of silent torment. She could almost hear their voiceless screams, a haunting cacophony that reverberated in her mind. Alice's breath came in short, ragged gasps, her heartbeat a relentless drum in her ears. With every step, the swamp's pull grew stronger, the ground becoming more treacherous and unstable. Yet, through the haze of fear, a flicker of determination kept her moving. She had to find out what lay ahead, what dark secret this nightmare forest was hiding. She felt an invisible thread guiding her, drawing her deeper into the heart of the darkness that surrounded her. Alice finally emerged from the dense, twisted forest, finding herself at the base of a steep, rocky incline. The mountain loomed above her, its peak shrouded in a veil of mist. With a deep breath, she began her ascent, the air growing colder and thinner as she climbed. Each step felt like a monumental effort, her legs trembling with both exhaustion and the lingering fear from the forest below. As she neared the summit, a chilling breeze swept over her, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. The path leveled out, and she stepped onto a narrow ledge that offered a dizzying view of the shadowy forest below. But it wasn't the height that made her heart race with terror. At the very peak, standing motionless against the bleak sky, was a woman cloaked in black. The woman's robe billowed slightly in the wind, its dark fabric absorbing the light and giving her an almost spectral appearance. Her face was obscured by the deep hood, but as Alice took a hesitant step forward, the woman turned, revealing eyes that burned with a malevolent intensity. Her gaze was sharp, cutting through the mist and piercing Alice with an unspoken malice. Alice felt a wave of icy fear wash over her, rooting her to the spot. The woman's eyes seemed to hold a darkness that went beyond mere hostility, a void that threatened to consume everything in its path. Despite the overwhelming urge to turn and flee, Alice found herself unable to move, her body betraying her once more. The air around them grew colder, the chills sinking deep into Alice's bones. She could see her breath fogging in the frigid air, each exhale a stark reminder of the unnatural cold that surrounded the mysterious figure. The woman's lips curled into a sinister smile, a stark contrast to the lifeless, predatory look in her eyes. Alice's mind raced, every instinct screaming at her to run, to get away from this embodiment of dread. Yet something stronger than fear held her in place, a morbid curiosity perhaps, or a sense that fleeing would only provoke the woman further. Her heart pounded in her chest, the sound echoing in her ears like a drumbeat of impending doom. The woman in black took a step closer, her movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring Alice's terror. The air between them seemed to crackle with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that made it hard for Alice to breathe. The world around them faded, the forest and the sky dimming as if the woman's presence consumed the very light itself. Alice's skin prickled with the sensation of unseen eyes watching her every move. The woman's smile widened, revealing teeth that were unnaturally sharp, glinting in the faint light. Alice's mouth went dry, her words caught in her throat, unable to voice the questions and fears that swirled in her mind. In that moment, standing on the precipice of the mountain, with the malevolent figure looming before her, Alice felt the full weight of her own powerlessness. The woman was a harbinger of something ancient and terrifying, and Alice knew instinctively that this encounter was a pivotal moment, one that would define the boundaries of her nightmare. Alice's heart pounded as she descended from the mountain peak, her mind still reeling from the encounter with the sinister woman in black. The forest had grown even darker, the shadows deepening into an almost tangible presence that seemed to press in on her from all sides. Her footsteps were slow and cautious, every crackle of leaves underfoot sending a jolt of fear through her already frayed nerves. As she ventured deeper into the woods, she noticed a strange depression in the ground ahead. Curiosity mingled with dread as she approached it, the air growing colder with each step. The hollow was deep and wide, its edges uneven and raw, as if hastily dug. Alice peered over the rim, her breath catching in her throat as she saw what lay within. At the bottom of the pit was the small, lifeless body of a child. The sight was horrifyingly familiar. Alice's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her mind struggling to process the terrible reality before her. It was her younger brother, Ilya, his face pale and still, his eyes closed as if in sleep. A wave of grief and guilt washed over her, mingling with the terror that gripped her heart. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Ilya's eyes snapped open. They were wide with fear, darting around as if searching for something unseen. He struggled to sit up, his small hands grasping at the earth around him. Alice watched in stunned silence, her mind unable to comprehend the impossibility of what she was seeing. Ilya's voice was a ragged whisper, filled with urgency and fear. "You have to get away," She's coming. She's coming. She's... Before he could finish, a shadow fell over them. Alice looked up to see the woman in black standing at the edge of the pit. Her hood had fallen back, revealing a face that was eerily blank, devoid of any features. It was as if she were a living shadow, a void given form and substance. The sight was more terrifying than anything Alice had ever seen. The woman's featureless face turned toward Alice, and though she had no eyes, Alice felt a chilling gaze settle upon her. Panic surged through her, freezing her in place as the woman moved with inhuman speed, descending into the pit with a fluid grace that defied reason. She reached for Ilya, her long, shadowy fingers stretching out like tendrils of darkness. "No," Alice screamed, finally finding her voice. She scrambled to her feet, her instincts driving her to protect her brother. But the woman was too fast. She wrapped her hands around Ilya, her touch causing him to convulse in pain. Ilya's eyes locked onto Alice's, filled with a mixture of terror and sorrow. "Run," he managed to choke out, his voice trembling with agony. "Please, Alice, run." But Alice couldn't leave him. With a surge of desperate courage, she lunged at the woman, her hands reaching for the shadowy figure. The woman turned to face her, and Alice felt a wave of icy cold wash over her, sapping her strength and filling her with an overwhelming sense of dread. Before she could react, the woman's featureless face twisted into an expression of pure malice. Her grip on Elliot tightened, and she flung him aside with a casual strength that sent his small body crashing against the side of the pit. Alice's heart shattered at the sight, but she had no time to mourn. The woman turned her full attention to Alice, her form seeming to expand, the shadows around her growing darker and more oppressive. Alice tried to move, to fight back, but her limbs felt heavy and unresponsive. The woman reached for her, and as her fingers closed around Alice's throat, the world went dark. She could hear Ilya's faint, anguished cries, and the last thing she saw, her skin was clammy with sweat, and she could still feel the ghostly grip of the shadowy woman around her throat. She glanced around, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the car's interior. Her mother sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead with a distant, unreadable expression. Her stepfather, Vadim, was behind the wheel, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel with unnecessary force. There was an unsettling silence between them, thick and palpable. Alice turned her head to check on her younger brother, Ilya. He was in the seat beside her, gazing out the window with wide, unblinking eyes. His small face was pressed against the glass, and he seemed entirely absorbed by the passing scenery. The calmness in his demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaotic swirl of emotions inside Alice. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her voice sounding small and shaky. "Only about 20 minutes," her mother replied without turning around. Her tone was flat, devoid of any comfort or reassurance. Alice nodded, feeling a pang of unease. The nightmare had felt so vivid, so real, that it was hard to believe it had only been a dream. She glanced out the window, recognizing the landscape that signaled they were nearing the village. The trees here were older, their branches gnarled and twisted, casting long, eerie shadows over the road. As they approached the village, a sense of dread settled over Alice like a heavy cloak. She had never wanted to come here, especially not after the death of her great-grandmother. The idea of staying in the old, decrepit house filled her with a deep-seated fear she couldn't quite explain. Her thoughts drifted back to the nightmare, to the sight of her brother's lifeless body in the pit and the terrifying woman who had attacked them. She shivered, hugging herself tightly. The feeling of being watched, of an unseen danger lurking just out of sight, still lingered. Ilya turned to look at her, his blue eyes curious and slightly concerned. "Are you okay, Alice?" he asked softly. She forced a smile, not wanting to alarm him. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a bad dream." He nodded, but his gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, as if he sensed more than she was letting on. Then he turned back to the window, his small hand resting against the glass. The car slowed as they entered the village. The houses here were old and worn, their paint peeling and their windows dark. There was an air of neglect, of a place forgotten by time. The few people they saw moved slowly, their faces downcast, as if weighed down by an invisible burden. Vadim pulled the car to a stop in front of the great-grandmother's house. It looked even more foreboding in person than Alice had remembered, with its sagging roof and boarded-up windows. She swallowed hard, feeling her stomach churn with anxiety. "Let's get this over with," Vadim muttered, breaking the silence as he turned off the engine. He opened the door and stepped out, followed by Alice's mother, who moved with the same mechanical, emotionless precision. Alice took a deep breath and reached for the door handle. Ilya was already out, his small figure standing by the car, looking up at the house with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. She climbed out, the cool air hitting her like a slap, and joined him. As they stood there, staring at the dilapidated house that loomed before them, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible awaited them inside. The nightmare, the oppressive silence, the palpable tension in the air, it all seemed like a prelude to something dark and sinister. They walked toward the house, the gravel crunching under their feet. Alice cast one last glance at her brother, his innocent face reflecting the overcast sky. She knew she had to stay strong for him, no matter what awaited them in the shadows of their great-grandmother's home. The purpose of their trip loomed heavily over Alice as they stood in front of the dilapidated house. They were there because of her great-grandmother's recent death, a fact that seemed to cast a shadow even darker than the overcast sky. Alice felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. Her great-grandmother's passing had been sudden, and the decision to visit the village and the house had not been hers or her mother's. It had been Vadim's. Alice glanced at her stepfather as he fiddled with the keys, a determined set to his jaw. Vadim had insisted on the trip, his eagerness barely concealed behind a veneer of concern for family obligations. Alice knew better. She had overheard enough late-night conversations and seen enough of his scheming glances to understand his true intentions. Vadim wanted the house. It wasn't about honoring her great-grandmother's memory or supporting Alice's mother through a time of loss. It was about property, about the potential that old, decrepit house held. The house had been in the family for generations, a relic of a past life that none of them really understood. To Vadim, it was a potential asset, a way to expand his already overbearing control over their lives. Alice's mother had been reluctant, but Vadim's insistence, backed by cold logic and promises of future security, had worn her down. As they approached the front door, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that Vadim's motives were rooted in something even darker than greed. She had always found the house unsettling. Her few visits as a child had left her with a sense of dread, an inexplicable fear that seemed to seep from the very walls. Now, standing at the threshold, that fear returned with a vengeance. Her mother moved with slow, reluctant steps, her eyes avoiding the house, as if afraid to look at it too closely. She had never spoken much about her grandmother, always changing the subject when questions arose. Alice wondered if there were secrets buried here, in this house, secrets her mother wanted to keep hidden. Ilya, oblivious to the adult tensions, clutched Alice's hand. He was too young to understand the full weight of their visit, the undercurrents of deceit and hidden motives. His innocent presence was a small comfort to Alice, a reminder of the normalcy she was desperate to hold on to. Vadim unlocked the door and pushed it open with a creak that echoed through the empty house. The air inside was stale, tinged with the unmistakable scent of decay. Dust motes floated in the dim light, disturbed by their entry. "Come on," Vadim said, his voice gruff. "Let's get settled in." They stepped inside, the wooden floorboards groaning under their weight. The house felt alive in a way that was deeply unsettling, as if it had been waiting for them. Alice felt a shiver run down her spine, the shadows in the corners seeming to shift and move. Alice's mother moved toward the kitchen, her movements mechanical and devoid of emotion. Alice could see the strain in her eyes, the way she avoided looking at Vadim. It was clear she was here against her will, just as much a prisoner of circumstances as Alice felt. "Let's start with the upstairs rooms," Vadim suggested, already moving toward the staircase. His tone brooked no argument, and Alice's mother followed reluctantly. Alice and Ilya exchanged a glance. She squeezed his hand reassuringly and led him up the stairs. The steps creaked ominously, each one sounding like a warning. As they reached the landing, Alice couldn't help but think about the true reason they were there. It wasn't just about claiming a house. There was something else, something buried in the fabric of the old building, something that Vadim wanted to unearth. Alice felt a sense of impending doom, a premonition that whatever lay ahead would change their lives forever. She just hoped she could protect Ilya from the worst of it. The mood in the family was palpably tense as they drove towards the village. Alice stared out of the window, her face a mask of discontent. She didn't want to go. The entire trip seemed pointless and foolish, driven solely by Vadim's greed and thinly veiled ambitions. Her stepfather's plan to claim her great-grandmother's house felt wrong on so many levels. The house held memories, history, and a haunting sense of foreboding that she couldn't shake. Her mother sat in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, but Alice could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clutched the purse on her lap. She was trapped between loyalty to her husband and an unspoken dread that mirrored Alice's own. They both knew Vadim's motives weren't pure, but he had a way of pushing his will onto others, leaving no room for dissent. Ilya, her younger brother, was the only one who seemed unaffected by the oppressive atmosphere. He sat beside Alice, humming softly to himself, his innocent eyes wide with curiosity about the journey. At 5 years old, he was blissfully unaware of the adult complexities that surrounded them. For him, the trip was an adventure, a chance to see new places and experience something different. Alice envied his innocence, but she also felt a fierce protectiveness towards him. She knew that part of her reluctance stemmed from a desire to shield Ilya from whatever dark secrets the village and the house might hold. He deserved to remain untouched by the shadows that seemed to creep into their lives, cast by the imposing figure of Vadim and the unsettling legacy of their great-grandmother. The landscape outside grew more desolate as they neared the village. Trees loomed closer to the road, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers, casting elongated shadows in the fading light. The sense of isolation deepened, and with it, Alice's anxiety. She couldn't help but feel that they were heading into something sinister, a place where the past refused to stay buried. Vadim, oblivious to the unease around him, drove with a determined focus. He was a man on a mission, every mile bringing him closer to his goal. His face was set in a hard line, his eyes never leaving the road. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was only to issue curt instructions, or to answer Ilya's innocent questions with distracted monosyllables. As they turned onto the narrow, winding road that led to the village, Alice's mother finally spoke. "I hope this isn't a mistake," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. Vadim glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "It's not," he said firmly. "We're doing what's best for the family. This house will be a new start for us." Alice wanted to scream that it wasn't about a new start. It was about what they were leaving behind, about the unknown dangers they were driving towards. But she remained silent, biting back her words. She knew it wouldn't make a difference. Vadim's mind was made up, and nothing she said would change that. Instead, she reached over and took Ilya's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. He looked up at her with a trusting smile, and she forced herself to smile back. For his sake, she needed to be strong. No matter what awaited them in the village, she would protect him. That much she could promise. The car finally crested a hill, and the village came into view, nestled in a hollow, surrounded by dense forest. The houses were old and weathered, their windows like dark, empty eyes. As they descended into the village, a sense of foreboding settled over Alice, heavier than ever. They pulled up in front of the house, its silhouette stark against the darkening sky. Vadim turned off the engine, and for a moment, there was silence. Alice felt the weight of the journey press down on her, the unspoken fears and tensions of the family converging in this moment. "Let's go," Vadim said, breaking the silence. He opened his door and stepped out, his movements brisk and purposeful. Alice took a deep breath, squeezed Ilya's hand once more, and followed her family into the unknown, hoping that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. As they arrived in the village, Alice was struck by its eerie stillness. The place seemed devoid of life, its empty streets lined with dilapidated houses that appeared to be crumbling under the weight of their own history. The overcast sky cast a gray pall over everything, adding to the desolate atmosphere. Weeds and wild grass had taken over what once might have been gardens, and the occasional rusting car stood like silent sentinels, witnesses to a past long forgotten. Vadim, ever the authoritarian, stepped out of the car with an air of forced civility. He moved quickly to the trunk, pulling out bags and issuing commands with sharp, precise movements. "Come on, we don't have all day," he barked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. He seemed determined to maintain an appearance of control and normalcy, but Alice could see through his facade. His eyes darted around nervously, betraying a tension that matched her own unease. Alice stepped out of the car, her feet crunching on the gravel driveway. She glanced at her mother, whose face was a mask of inscrutability. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of anxiety that she quickly masked when she caught Alice's gaze. It was clear that her mother was hiding something, a secret tied to the village and their great-grandmother, but what it was, Alice couldn't yet fathom. The house loomed ahead, its dark, shuttered windows like hollow eyes watching their every move. Alice felt a shiver run down her spine as she took in the sight. It was larger than she had imagined, with an air of neglect that spoke of years without care. The front door was closed, and as they approached, she noticed the symbols and marks etched into the wood, faint but unmistakable. They looked like old, weathered sigils, their meanings lost to time but still carrying an aura of menace. "I'll get the rest of the bags," Vadim said curtly. "You two, start taking these inside." He handed a couple of suitcases to Alice and her mother, then turned back to the car without another word. Alice's mother hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked towards the house. Alice followed, clutching the handles of the heavy suitcases. As they stepped onto the porch, the wood creaked ominously under their weight. Her mother reached for the doorknob, pausing briefly before turning it and pushing the door open. The inside of the house was dark and musty, filled with the smell of dust and old wood. Alice's eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light, revealing a foyer cluttered with antique furniture and stacks of old newspapers. The wallpaper was peeling, and cobwebs draped the corners like sinister decorations. This was her home, her mother said softly, almost to herself. There was a strange mixture of reverence and fear in her voice, as if the place held memories that she both cherished and dreaded. Alice's sense of unease deepened. She could feel the weight of the house's history pressing down on her, the echoes of the past whispering in the silence. She looked at her mother, searching her face for answers, but found only a guarded expression. "What are you not telling me?" Alice asked, her voice trembling slightly. Her mother shook her head. "It's not important right now. We need to get settled in." But, Alice, please," her mother interrupted, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "Just do as I say." Alice bit her lip, her frustration and fear mingling into a knot in her stomach. She wanted to press her mother for answers, but the look in her eyes warned her not to. Reluctantly, she picked up the suitcases again and followed her mother further into the house. As they moved through the dim rooms, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to shift and move, and she caught glimpses of shapes out of the corner of her eye that vanished when she turned to look. She knew it was just her imagination, fueled by the oppressive atmosphere, but it did little to calm her nerves. Vadim entered with the last of the bags, his expression sour. "Let's get this done quickly," he said. "We have a lot of work to do." Alice nodded absently, her mind still preoccupied with the strange sense of foreboding that had settled over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had walked into something far more sinister than just an old, neglected house. There were secrets here, buried deep, and she was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. As Alice approached the front door of her great-grandmother's house, she felt a chill run down her spine. The ominous symbols and graffiti scrawled across the weathered wood seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes widening in disbelief at what she was seeing. Directly in the center of the door was a large, crudely drawn pentagram. The five-pointed star, encased within a circle, was unmistakable and exuded an air of dark ritual. The lines were jagged and uneven, as if drawn in a frenzy, adding to the sense of foreboding that hung in the air. Just below the pentagram, written in what looked like dried blood, were the words "Die Witch the Crude." Angry letters seemed to scream out at her, their message filled with a hatred that sent shivers through her body. The sight of the violent red against the faded wood was both grotesque and deeply unsettling. To the right of the words was the number 666, another symbol of dread. The numbers were etched deeply into the door, the grooves dark and ominous. Alice had heard stories about the number of the beast, and seeing it here, on the house where her family had once lived, filled her with a sense of impending doom. The final mark, positioned above the pentagram, was a large, inverted cross. It seemed to hang over the door like a dark omen, its presence a blasphemous defiance of everything holy. The cross was scratched into the wood with such force that splinters radiated from the lines, giving it a raw and violent appearance. Alice's breath caught in her throat. The combination of these symbols told a story of fear and hatred directed towards her great-grandmother. The implications were clear. The villagers believed her great-grandmother to be a witch, and their anger had manifested in these sinister warnings. She felt a deep unease, as if she were being drawn into a dark, hidden world that she barely understood. She turned to look at her mother, whose face was pale and drawn. It was clear that she, too, felt the weight of these symbols. Vadim, however, seemed unfazed. He shrugged off the markings with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Just some local superstitions," he said gruffly. "We have work to do." Alice nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. Each step towards the door felt like a step into another realm, one where dark forces and ancient grudges lay in wait. She could sense that the house held many secrets, and that uncovering them might come at a great cost. As they crossed the threshold, the house seemed to welcome them with a groan, the wooden floorboards creaking under their weight. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and decay. Alice felt a tight knot of anxiety in her chest. She couldn't help but feel that they were intruding on something ancient and powerful, something that did not take kindly to trespassers. As Alice and her younger brother Ilya stepped cautiously into the village square, they were immediately greeted by a trio of elderly villagers. These three were unlike any locals Alice had encountered before. Their eyes were sharp and penetrating, their gazes unwavering as they scrutinized the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The first elder, a woman with weathered skin and piercing gray eyes, seemed to size up Alice and Ilya with a gaze that felt like it could pierce through their souls. She wore a faded shawl tightly around her shoulders, as if bracing against an unseen chill that permeated the air. Next to her stood an elderly man, tall and stoic, his expression unreadable beneath a bushy white beard. He leaned heavily on a gnarled cane, yet his posture exuded a quiet strength that commanded respect. His eyes, though aged and weary, held a glint of deep intelligence that spoke of years spent observing the world with a keen understanding. The third elder, a frail-looking woman with wispy white hair, clutched a bundle of dried herbs in one hand, while the other rested on a gnarled wooden staff. Her gaze flickered between Alice and Ilya with a mix of wariness and ancient wisdom, as if she could sense something unsettling lurking beneath the surface of their presence. As the siblings approached, the villagers' hushed conversation ceased abruptly, replaced by an uneasy silence that seemed to stretch on indefinitely. Alice felt a chill run down her spine, a sensation that was only intensified by the elders' unwavering scrutiny. She exchanged a quick glance with Ilya, who appeared oblivious to the tension but instinctively moved closer to her side. The woman with the shawl finally broke the silence, her voice low and gravelly, carrying a weight of authority that demanded attention. "You must be the ones Vadim brought," she said, her words more statement than question. There was a hint of caution in her tone, as if she were assessing whether Alice and Ilya belonged in their midst. Alice hesitated, unsure of how much Vadim had disclosed about their visit. "Yes, we're here with Vadim," she replied cautiously, her voice betraying a trace of uncertainty. She couldn't shake the feeling that these elders knew more than they let on, their collective presence casting a shadow of unease over the otherwise quiet village square. The elderly man spoke next, his voice deep and resonant despite his advanced age. "You've come at a troubled time," he remarked cryptically, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to gauge their reaction. His words hung in the air ominously, leaving Alice with a sense of foreboding that she struggled to shake off. The third elder remained silent, her gaze fixed intently on Alice. She seemed to be weighing something, her expression inscrutable yet tinged with a hint of concern. Alice felt a growing unease as she realized that these elders held a deeper knowledge of the village's secrets, knowledge that could potentially unravel the fragile peace they had unwittingly disrupted. Before Alice could muster a response, the elderly woman with the shawl nodded curtly. "Come," she said briskly, gesturing towards a narrow alley that led deeper into the village. "We have much to discuss." Her tone brooked no argument, and Alice found herself reluctantly following the elders, Ilya trailing close behind. As they walked, Alice couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes lingering in the shadows of the ancient village. She stole a glance back at the trio of elders, their figures fading into the dimming light of dusk. In their expressions, she glimpsed a mixture of curiosity, concern, and an underlying wariness that mirrored her own growing apprehension. The overgrown courtyard of their great-grandmother's house greeted Alice and Ilya with a haunting desolation. Weeds thrust defiantly through cracks in the cobblestones, their tendrils winding around neglected statuary and crawling up the weathered walls like sinister veins. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, intensifying the eerie atmosphere that clung to every corner. Alice's attention was drawn not only to the neglect that had consumed the once-tended courtyard, but also to the unsettling change in her younger brother. Normally independent and self-assured, Ilya now clung to Alice as if seeking refuge from unseen terrors lurking in the shadows. His usually bright eyes now held a glimmer of unease, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached out for her. As they stepped cautiously across the uneven ground, Alice felt a chill creep up her spine, a sensation that seemed to echo Ilya's uncharacteristic vulnerability. She knelt beside him, wrapping a protective arm around his quivering shoulders, silently reassuring him with a gentle squeeze. Yet her own unease gnawed at her, fueled by the strange symbols on the door and the unsettling demeanor of the villagers. The courtyard seemed frozen in time, a forgotten relic of generations past, its silence broken only by the faint rustling of leaves and the distant creak of old timber. Shadows danced ominously across the cracked pavement, casting eerie shapes that seemed to shift and writhe with a life of their own. Alice couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes followed their every move from behind half-closed shutters and weather-beaten doorways. Ilya's grip tightened around Alice's waist, his small frame trembling against her side. She whispered soothing words, attempting to dispel the palpable fear that hung in the air like a suffocating fog. But with each step deeper into the courtyard, the weight of their great-grandmother's legacy bore down upon them, its mysteries and malevolent whispers weaving a tapestry of dread that tightened around their hearts. As they reached the shadowed threshold of the house, Alice glanced back at the courtyard, her gaze lingering on the tangled weeds and the twisted remnants of forgotten beauty. It was as if the very essence of the place had seeped into Ilya's soul, leaving him vulnerable to forces neither of them fully understood. With a heavy heart and a wary mind, Alice led her brother across the threshold, steeling herself for the dark secrets that awaited within the cold embrace of their ancestral home. Grandmother Maria greeted Alice and Ilya with unexpected vigor, her presence defying the image of a frail old woman that Alice had envisioned. Despite her lively demeanor, the atmosphere inside the house was thick with an unsettling odor, a mixture of musty air and something more pungent that seemed to cling to the faded wallpaper and worn furniture. The living room where they gathered exuded a sense of faded grandeur, with antique furniture draped in dusty cloths and old photographs staring down from ornate frames on the walls. Shadows danced uneasily in the corners, casting fleeting glimpses of forgotten memories and secrets long buried beneath layers of time. Grandmother Maria's eyes, though bright with warmth, held a hint of weariness that tugged at Alice's heart. It was evident that the burden of age and solitude weighed heavily on the old woman, despite her attempts to maintain a cheerful facade. The lines etched on her face spoke of a lifetime marked by joys and sorrows, victories and losses, all hidden behind a resilient spirit that refused to yield to the passage of time. As they exchanged polite pleasantries, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the surface, a deeper sadness lurked, a sorrow that mirrored the decaying grandeur of the once stately home. The air itself seemed to whisper tales of forgotten dreams and regrets, mingling with the faint echoes of laughter that lingered like fragile echoes in the dimly lit room. Grandmother Maria's hands trembled slightly as she poured tea into delicate china cups, the clink of porcelain against saucer punctuating the uneasy silence that settled between them. Alice found herself drawn to the old woman's gaze, searching for answers that lay buried within the depths of her soul. But all she found was a poignant reflection of her own uncertainties and fears, mirrored in the lines of Grandmother Maria's weathered face. As the conversation turned to memories of the past, Alice sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle undercurrent of tension that belied the superficial cheer. The walls seemed to lean in closer, as if eager to eavesdrop on secrets whispered between generations, while outside, the wind sighed mournfully through the neglected garden, carrying with it the echoes of forgotten whispers and unspoken truths. Grandmother Maria's voice, tinged with nostalgia, wove a tapestry of tales that spanned decades, each thread tinged with the bittersweet hues of love and loss. Her words painted vivid images of a bygone era, where youth danced in the moonlit gardens and laughter echoed through sunlit halls. Yet beneath the surface lay the haunting specter of regret, a regret that seeped into the cracks of the old house, staining its walls with the weight of unfulfilled promises and broken dreams. As the evening wore on, Alice found herself caught between sympathy for Grandmother Maria's loneliness and an unsettling awareness of the darkness that lurked beneath the facade of familial warmth. The old woman's laughter, though genuine, echoed hollowly in the recesses of Alice's mind, a stark reminder of the fragility of happiness in the face of inexorable time. And so, as they bid farewell to Grandmother Maria that evening, Alice carried with her not only the weight of unanswered questions, but also a growing sense of foreboding that whispered of hidden truths and untold secrets waiting to be unearthed in the shadows of their ancestral home. With a determined effort, Vadim pried loose the boards that had sealed the windows, allowing sunlight to flood into the dimly lit rooms of their grandmother's house. As the musty air stirred and the dust motes danced in the newfound brightness, Alice noticed how the once oppressive atmosphere seemed to lighten, if only slightly. Grandmother Maria watched with a mixture of relief and nostalgia as the daylight revealed the neglected corners of the old house. She explained, in a voice tinged with regret, that the boards had been nailed up by mischievous children from the village long ago, playing pranks that had left her unable to remove them herself. The admission carried a weight of unspoken sorrow, hinting at years spent in solitude, isolated from the outside world by barriers that were as much physical as they were metaphorical. As the afternoon sun streamed through the now open windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the worn wooden floors, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that their actions had stirred something dormant within the house, a presence that had lain dormant and hidden behind closed shutters and barred windows. Outside, the village seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for a revelation that hovered on the edge of understanding. The wind whispered through the overgrown garden, rustling leaves that whispered secrets to the watchful trees, while distant echoes of laughter and footsteps echoed faintly from the forgotten past. Grandmother Maria's hands trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the sunlight streaming through the open window, as if seeking solace in its warmth. Her gaze, fixed on the distant horizon beyond the village, held a quiet longing that spoke volumes about the passage of time and the weight of memories carried in the heart. For Alice and Elia, the simple act of removing the boards had not only brought light into their grandmother's home, but had also unveiled layers of hidden history and untold stories that lingered in the shadows. As they stood together in the glow of the afternoon sun, they sensed that they were on the cusp of uncovering truths that had long been obscured by the veil of time, a journey that promised both illumination and unsettling revelations in equal measure. As Alice and her mother embarked on the task of cleaning and tidying up their grandmother's house, they ventured into the neglected corners and shadowed recesses that held remnants of a forgotten past. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dried flowers, mingling with the faint aroma of decay that clung stubbornly to the walls. Grandmother Maria watched with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension as they dusted off old photographs and rearranged furniture that had stood unchanged for decades. Each item they uncovered seemed to carry a whisper of memories, some whispered secrets that hovered just out of reach, evoking a sense of unease that permeated the once silent rooms. Despite her advancing years and the burden she carried within, Grandmother Maria's eyes sparkled with a hint of nostalgia as she witnessed her granddaughter and daughter-in-law breathe new life into the familiar surroundings. She spoke softly of days long gone, of laughter echoing through the halls and the warmth of family gatherings that had filled these rooms with joy. Yet beneath the surface, there lingered an unspoken tension, a palpable sense that not all was as it seemed. The creaking floorboards and shifting shadows seemed to play tricks on their senses, whispering secrets that only the house itself could comprehend. Alice couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, as if unseen eyes followed their every move with a quiet intensity that sent shivers down her spine. As they worked tirelessly to make the house more habitable, they uncovered more than just dust and disarray. Hidden beneath layers of neglect were fragments of a past that refused to be forgotten, a tapestry woven with threads of both joy and sorrow, secrets and regrets that bound them together in a web of familial history. Despite the challenges and the unsettling undercurrents that haunted their efforts, Alice and her mother persisted, driven by a shared determination to restore not just the physical space, but also the spirit that had once thrived within its walls. Grandmother Maria's smile, though tinged with melancholy, spoke volumes of her appreciation for their efforts, a silent acknowledgement of the burden she had borne alone for so long. And so, in the quiet hours of their labor, amidst the flickering light of candles and the gentle murmur of whispered conversations, they forged a bond that transcended time and circumstance, a testament to the resilience of family ties that endure even in the face of darkness and uncertainty. Alice's unease deepened as she wandered through the eerily quiet village. The absence of familiar sounds, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, even the distant barking of dogs struck her as profoundly unnatural and unsettling. It was as if the very essence of life had been muted, leaving behind a haunting silence that enveloped her like a heavy fog. The streets, once bustling with the comings and goings of villagers, now lay still and desolate. Windows of the quaint cottages stared blankly back at her, their curtains drawn tight as if hiding secrets best left undisturbed. The cobblestone pathways, usually alive with the laughter of children and the chatter of neighbors, echoed hollowly under Alice's hesitant footsteps. Her senses heightened in this unnatural quietude, Alice began to notice subtle anomalies that seemed to defy rational explanation. Shadows moved where there should have been none, flickering at the edge of her vision before vanishing into the murky depths of forgotten alleyways. The air itself felt heavy with a palpable tension, as if the very fabric of reality strained against an unseen force. Unnerved but determined, Alice pressed on, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Every corner turned, every door passed heightened her awareness of being watched, an unseen presence that stirred the hairs on the back of her neck and sent shivers down her spine. As she ventured deeper into the heart of the village, the oppressive silence seemed to thicken around her, suffocating any attempt at rational thought. It was not merely the absence of sound that unsettled her, but the profound sense of isolation that seemed to permeate every inch of the village like a lingering curse. With each passing moment, Alice's apprehension grew, a nagging feeling that she had stumbled into a realm where time stood still, where the boundary between the living and the spectral blurred into an indistinct haze. She dared not speak aloud, fearing that even the sound of her own voice would shatter the fragile equilibrium that held this spectral realm together. And yet, despite the overwhelming dread that clawed at her consciousness, Alice was drawn inexorably forward, compelled by a primal instinct to uncover the truth hidden within the oppressive silence of the village. For beneath its tranquil facade lurked a darkness that whispered of forgotten mysteries and ancient secrets that now beckoned her into their chilling embrace, promising answers that may forever change her understanding of reality itself. Alice sat by the dimly lit window of her grandmother's house, the soft glow from her phone illuminating her troubled expression as she typed out a message to her friend back in the city. "Hey Emily," she began, her fingers hesitating over the keys, "I miss the city more than ever. This village is just, I don't know, suffocating. It's like time here moves slower, and everything feels so off." As she tapped out each word, Alice's thoughts drifted to the unsettling stillness that pervaded the village, the quiet streets, the somber faces of the villagers, and the eerie shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of her vision. "And Ully," she continued, referring to her younger brother, "he's starting to feel it too. He keeps asking when we can go back home. It's like he can't stand it here either." Alice paused, momentarily lost in the melancholy of her own words. She could sense the weight of isolation pressing down on her, amplifying the discomfort she and Ilya shared. "It's not just boredom," she typed slowly, struggling to articulate the unease that gnawed at her. "It's this strange feeling that something's watching us, something we can't see, but it's there." With a sigh, Alice hit send, hoping her friend would understand the depth of her unease, despite the difficulty in putting it into words. She leaned back against the creaking wooden chair, glancing over at Ilya, who sat quietly across the room, his expression mirroring her own discontent. The air in the room felt heavy with unspoken fears, the oppressive silence of the village weighing upon them both like an invisible shroud. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, concealing mysteries that seemed to stir in the darkness beyond. As Alice awaited Emily's reply, a chilling realization crept into her thoughts that perhaps their discomfort was not merely a product of unfamiliar surroundings, but a foreboding sign of deeper, darker truths hidden within the village's tranquil facade. And as much as she longed for the familiar bustle of city life, a part of her feared what they might uncover if they were to leave this place too soon. The first night at her grandmother's house passed with an eerie calm that unsettled Alice, despite its apparent tranquility. Nestled in the old creaking bed, she lay awake for a while, listening to the rhythmic sounds of Ilya's restless tossing and turning in the adjacent room. Every now and then she would drift into brief moments of uneasy sleep, only to be jolted awake by the faintest of sounds, the creaking of floorboards outside her door, or the whisper of wind through the cracks in the window frame. The house seemed to exhale its ancient secrets with each gust of wind, and Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching from the shadows. She kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to swing open on its own, revealing a figure standing silently in the hallway. Despite her unease, the night remained relatively uneventful. The silence outside was profound, interrupted only by the occasional distant howl of a lone wolf or the eerie hoot of an owl. It was as if the entire village held its breath, waiting for something that Alice couldn't quite comprehend. Ilya's restless movements continued sporadically throughout the night, punctuating the darkness with subtle reminders of their unfamiliar surroundings. Alice found herself slipping in and out of consciousness, caught between the comfort of sleep and the unsettling awareness of being watched. As dawn broke through the thin curtains, casting a pale light into the room, Alice finally succumbed to exhaustion. The night had passed without incident, yet a lingering tension hung in the air like a veil, hinting at darker revelations yet to unfold in the quiet solitude of her grandmother's house. Before leaving for the hospital, Alice's mother pulled her aside with a look of deep concern etched on her face. In a hushed tone, she urged Alice to limit her interactions with her grandmother and to keep a close watch on Ilya, making sure he didn't get too close to her either. Her mother's words carried a weight of unspoken fear, hinting at some undisclosed threat lurking in the shadows of their family history. As Alice listened, a chill crept down her spine, despite the warmth of the morning sun filtering through the kitchen window. Her mother's usually calm demeanor was replaced by a palpable sense of urgency, as if she were protecting them from an invisible danger that only she fully understood. "I know you love spending time with Baba Maria," her mother began, using the affectionate term for their grandmother, "but promise me you'll be careful. Something doesn't feel right, and I need you to keep an eye on things while I'm away." Alice nodded solemnly, absorbing her mother's words with a mixture of confusion and growing apprehension. She had always regarded her grandmother as a source of comfort and wisdom, but now, faced with her mother's cryptic warning, the familiar walls of the old house seemed to close in around her. Her mother's parting embrace held an unspoken promise of protection, mingled with a silent plea for vigilance. As she watched her mother drive away, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that they had entered a realm where reality and the shadows of the past converged, and that their time in the quiet village held secrets darker than she had ever imagined. Alice began to notice subtle changes in her grandmother's demeanor that set her on edge, especially in light of her mother's cryptic warnings. Baba Maria appeared more tired than usual, her usually bright eyes now carrying a distant, almost haunted look. There were moments when Alice caught her grandmother staring blankly into space, as if lost in a realm of memories that eluded her family's understanding. The old house seemed to echo with Baba Maria's quiet footsteps, which now sounded heavier and more deliberate. Her once lively conversations turned into fleeting whispers, leaving Alice with unanswered questions that lingered in the air like unspoken secrets. Each day, the atmosphere grew heavier, weighed down by a palpable sense of unease that Alice struggled to ignore. When she tried to engage her grandmother in conversation, Baba Maria's responses became increasingly evasive, as if she were shielding something from Alice's probing gaze. There were moments when Alice thought she saw flickers of fear in her grandmother's eyes, quickly masked by a forced smile that failed to reach her weary face. As days passed, Alice found herself torn between her affection for Baba Maria and the unsettling awareness that something was deeply amiss. Her grandmother's peculiar behavior gnawed at her like a relentless whisper of doubt, fueling her growing apprehension about the shadows that seemed to lengthen around them with each passing hour. Vadim immersed himself in the grueling tasks of reclaiming Baba Maria's neglected yard, his sleeves rolled up to reveal sinewy arms glistening with sweat under the midday sun. Each pull of stubborn weeds seemed to amplify his frustration, especially when Alice and Ilya mentioned venturing beyond the confines of the property. His voice, usually steady and commanding, now carried a sharp edge whenever he reminded them of the importance of staying close to home. He spoke of the need to assist Baba Maria in settling into her ancestral home, a duty he seemed to shoulder with unwavering determination. Yet beneath his gruff exterior and the facade of diligent caretaker, Alice sensed an undercurrent of urgency, a hidden motive driving his insistence on keeping them tethered to the house. Alice couldn't ignore the tension that seemed to thicken the air whenever Vadim caught her and Ilya planning a stroll through the quiet village streets or exploring the surrounding countryside. His objections felt less about maintaining the property and more about restricting their movements, as if he feared what they might uncover beyond the well-tended garden and the old, weather-beaten walls of Baba Maria's house. It was as though Vadim's relentless focus on the yard work was a shield, a barrier against the whispers of unease that seemed to drift through the village like a chilling breeze. His rigid adherence to routine tasks betrayed a deeper unease, an unspoken concern that lingered beneath his stern directives and brusque commands. Alice found herself increasingly wary of Vadim's motives, wondering if his insistence on yard work was driven by a genuine desire to restore order or a calculated strategy to keep them distracted and confined. The longer they stayed within the confines of Baba Maria's home, the more Alice sensed that Vadim was hiding something he feared they might uncover if they ventured too far from his watchful gaze. During a rare moment away from the watchful eye of Vadim, Alice found herself exploring the village streets with Ilya, soaking in the unfamiliar sights and the unsettling tranquility that hung over the place like a heavy fog. It was during this aimless stroll that she first encountered Olga, a girl about her age with a mischievous glint in her eyes and a readiness to show Alice the hidden corners of their seemingly deserted village. Olga led Alice through winding paths bordered by dilapidated houses, their windows boarded up and their gardens overgrown with weeds. Despite the eerie atmosphere, Olga's chatter about local rumors and ghost stories seemed to infuse the surroundings with a sense of adventure rather than fear. She pointed out the remnants of an old playground, its rusted swings and creaky seesaws standing as solemn reminders of happier times long past. As they walked, Olga spoke in hushed tones about Baba Maria's house, the very place Alice had been reluctantly calling home. She shared tales of strange noises echoing from its darkened windows at night and whispered about shadows seen moving behind its tightly closed curtains. Alice listened intently, her curiosity piqued despite a growing sense of unease. Olga's tales mingled with the stillness of the village, creating a haunting backdrop to their conversation. She spoke of villagers who disappeared without a trace, leaving behind empty homes and unanswered questions. Each story carried a hint of the supernatural, feeding Alice's imagination with unsettling images of restless spirits and hidden secrets buried beneath the village's quiet facade. By the time they parted ways, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that Olga knew more than she let on, that behind her playful demeanor lay a deeper understanding of the village's mysteries. As she returned to Baba Maria's house, Alice couldn't help but glance back at Olga's retreating figure, wondering if their chance encounter had opened a door to truths better left undisturbed. As they meandered through the quiet streets of the village, Olga's voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper, revealing a chilling local belief to Alice. According to Olga, the villagers whispered behind closed doors about Baba Maria, Alice's own great-grandmother, believing her to be a witch of formidable power. They feared that her abilities could be passed down through bloodlines, lingering in her descendants like a dormant curse waiting to awaken. Olga recounted tales of Baba Maria's eerie demeanor and her rumored nocturnal activities, tales that painted her as a mysterious figure with a touch of the supernatural. The locals avoided her house after dark, believing shadows danced on its walls and strange lights flickered in its windows when the moon was high. Some even claimed to have heard incantations drifting on the wind during the darkest hours, unsettling whispers that chilled the blood. Alice listened intently, her disbelief mingling with a creeping sense of dread. She had always regarded her great-grandmother as merely a frail old woman, but Olga's words planted seeds of doubt. The thought that her family harbored such dark secrets, whispered about in hushed tones behind closed doors, sent a shiver down her spine. Despite her initial skepticism, Alice couldn't shake the unsettling stories Olga had shared. The village seemed to hold its breath around Baba Maria's house, as if the very air carried whispers of ancient magic and unspoken fears. As they reached the edge of the village, Alice glanced back at the silhouette of the old woman's house against the twilight sky, its windows dark and inscrutable. With each step back to her great-grandmother's home, Alice couldn't help but feel a newfound wariness, wondering if the rumors held a kernel of truth, or if they were merely the product of fearful imaginations. One thing was certain: the village's tales of the witch in their midst had cast a shadow over her stay, making her question the nature of the woman she thought she knew. As Alice and her brother, Ilya, strolled through the village, they couldn't help but notice the wary glances and cautious nods from the villagers. It was as if an invisible barrier surrounded them, separating them from the community's warmth and camaraderie. Some villagers exchanged curt greetings, their smiles strained and their eyes quickly darting away. Others outright avoided any interaction, hurriedly disappearing into their homes or turning away at the sight of Alice and Ilya approaching. It was unnerving how the atmosphere shifted whenever they passed by, a palpable tension hanging in the air, like an unspoken threat. Alice tried to dismiss the unease, chalking it up to small-town insularity, or perhaps the villagers' natural wariness towards outsiders. Yet there was something deeper at play, a feeling that the villagers harbored secrets beneath their polite facades. It reminded her of the tales Olga had shared about Baba Maria, adding another layer of apprehension to their already uneasy stay. Even as they wandered deeper into the heart of the village, hoping to integrate themselves into the community, the aloofness persisted. It was as if the villagers held a collective mistrust, their guarded demeanor amplifying the sense of isolation Alice and Ilya felt in this unfamiliar place. As dusk settled over the village, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets, Alice couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that they were being watched. The windows of the tightly packed cottages seemed to conceal more than warm hearths and simple lives. They hid silent observers, their gazes lingering in the shadows. The experience left Alice questioning the true nature of the village and its inhabitants. Were they merely protective of their way of life, or did they guard darker secrets beneath their quiet facades? The answers eluded her, buried in the wary glances and hesitant greetings that marked their every encounter with the village folk. With each passing day, the unease grew, weaving itself into the fabric of their stay like a persistent thread of discomfort. Alice knew that unraveling the mystery of the village's standoffishness would require more than superficial interactions. It would demand delving into the depths of the villagers' guarded hearts and the shadows lurking within the quiet streets. Alice and Olya found common ground, despite their initial differences. Olya's fascination with local superstitions and Alice's knowledge about witches created an unexpected bond between them. As they walked back home together, the sky darkened with approaching rain, casting a somber hue over the village. Alice couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over her since they arrived. The encounter with Olya had stirred up unsettling thoughts about the village and its enigmatic inhabitants. The way Olya spoke of Baba Maria and the rumors circulating about her being a witch resonated uncomfortably with Alice's growing apprehension. The impending rain mirrored Alice's turbulent thoughts, each droplet seeming to echo the unanswered questions that lingered in her mind. Why did the villagers treat them with such caution and suspicion? What secrets did the quaint cottages and silent streets conceal behind their tranquil facade? As they walked, Olia's animated recount of local folklore intertwined with Alice's observations of the village's peculiar atmosphere. The air felt heavy with unspoken truths, as if the villagers were guarding more than just their quaint way of life. They were shielding deeper, darker mysteries that refused to be uncovered. Alice glanced up at the brooding sky, its dark clouds mirroring her unsettled thoughts. The village, once a refuge from the bustling city, now seemed cloaked in a veil of ambiguity and foreboding. Despite Olia's attempts to lighten the mood with her stories, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something ominous lurked beneath the surface of this picturesque village. As they parted ways at the edge of the village, Alice thanked Olia for her company but couldn't shake off the chilling realization that their newfound friendship might lead them both deeper into the village's mysteries. The rain began to fall, its gentle patter against the cobblestones a stark contrast to the turbulent thoughts swirling in Alice's mind. With each step towards home, Alice's resolve to unravel the secrets of the village strengthened, fueled by a mix of curiosity and trepidation. The rain intensified, washing away the day's warmth and casting a cold, eerie glow over the familiar path ahead. Little did she know, the storm brewing in the skies above mirrored the tempest of uncertainty brewing within her own heart. Alice couldn't shake off the unsettling events that had unfolded since their arrival in the village. The words of her mother echoed in her mind, warning her to keep a distance from Baba Maria and urging caution around the villagers. The mysterious symbols on the door and the boarded-up windows of her grandmother's house only deepened her unease. As she sat in her grandmother's dimly lit living room, Alice replayed the events of the day in her mind. The palpable fear in the eyes of the villagers whenever Baba Maria's name was mentioned haunted her thoughts. It wasn't just superstition, there was a genuine dread that seemed to permeate every corner of the village. The boarded windows stood as a silent testament to a hidden truth, one that Alice was determined to uncover despite the growing sense of foreboding. She recalled the chilling moment when her grandmother had casually mentioned that mischievous children had nailed the boards shut. Yet something about the way Baba Maria had said it hinted at a deeper, darker reality. Outside, the wind picked up, causing the old wooden shutters to rattle faintly against the window frames. Alice's nerves were on edge, every sound amplified in the silence of the house. She wondered if there was more to her grandmother's tired demeanor than met the eye. Could it be exhaustion from old age, or was it something more sinister, as her mother had hinted? The flickering lamp cast eerie shadows on the walls, adding to the atmosphere of uncertainty that hung in the air. The village, once a haven of rustic charm, now felt like a labyrinth of secrets and half-truths that Alice was desperate to unravel. Her resolve to uncover the truth clashed with her instinct to protect her family from whatever darkness lurked beneath the surface. As the night wore on, Alice's thoughts circled back to the peculiar symbols she had seen earlier. The pentagram, the inverted cross, and the ominous numbers etched in red seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if warning her to tread carefully. She couldn't dismiss them as mere pranks of mischievous children, not with the weight of unease settling in her chest. Outside, the storm unleashed its fury, rain pelting against the windows with a relentless rhythm. Each droplet seemed to echo her growing panic, a reflection of the tempestuous emotions swirling within her. Despite her mother's warnings and the villagers' wary glances, Alice knew she couldn't turn away from the truth any longer. With a deep breath, Alice steeled herself for what lay ahead. The night stretched ominously before her, filled with unanswered questions and whispered secrets that beckoned her deeper into the heart of the village's enigma. As the wind howled outside, Alice's determination to uncover the mysteries of her grandmother's house and the village intensified, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity that refused to be ignored. Alice's relief was palpable as her mother returned from the hospital, though tension crackled in the air between her and Vadim. Their argument, hushed but intense, cast a shadow over the reunion. Her mother's weary expression spoke volumes, hinting at burdens and concerns beyond the hospital walls. "We'll be leaving soon," her mother announced abruptly, breaking the strained silence that had settled in the room. For Alice, the Those words were a beacon of hope amidst the unsettling events that had unfolded since their arrival. The prospect of returning home stirred a mix of emotions: relief, apprehension, and a lingering unease about the secrets lurking in her grandmother's house and the village. As her mother unpacked her things, Alice watched silently, catching fleeting glances exchanged between her and Vadim. The tension between them simmered just below the surface, adding to the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Each movement her mother made seemed deliberate, as if she were preparing for a departure that couldn't come soon enough. Despite the tumultuous atmosphere, Alice felt a sense of reassurance knowing they would soon leave this place behind. The thought of returning to the familiarity of their city life brought a measure of comfort, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that they were leaving with more questions than answers. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a damp chill in the air. Alice found solace in the quiet moments with her mother, cherishing the brief respite before their departure. The events of the past days seemed surreal now, like fragments of a nightmare slowly fading with the morning light. As they packed their belongings and prepared to leave, Alice stole one last glance at her grandmother's house, its weathered facade holding secrets that would perhaps never be fully unraveled. The village, with its wary inhabitants and ominous whispers, seemed to watch their departure with silent vigilance. In the quiet of their final night there, Alice couldn't help but wonder what awaited them beyond the village's borders. Would they find peace and closure, or would the shadows of their time in this place continue to haunt them? One thing was certain: the memory of Baba Maria's house and the mysteries it held would linger in Alice's mind long after they had left, a reminder of the thin veil that separates reality from the unknown. Vadim's efforts to connect the house to electricity stirred a mix of emotions within Alice, each one as unsettling as the next. The hum of the generator coming to life after years of silence echoed through the walls, casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance ominously in the corners of her vision. For Alice, the sudden illumination of the house brought both relief and a deepening sense of unease. The harsh glare of electric light replaced the soft glow of candles and oil lamps that had flickered dimly during their stay. It illuminated corners that had previously been shrouded in mystery, revealing details that only added to the unsettling atmosphere. As Vadim checked wires and circuits with meticulous care, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the house. The once familiar creaks and groans of the old structure now seemed amplified, almost as if the house itself were protesting the intrusion of modernity into its ancient bones. Outside, the village remained wrapped in the quiet of dusk, the distant sounds of the countryside mingling with the mechanical hum of the generator. Shadows lengthened, stretching like fingers reaching out from the surrounding woods, and Alice found herself glancing nervously over her shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the growing darkness. Her unease only deepened as evening settled in. The steady thrum of electricity seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, each flicker of a light bulb casting strange shapes on the walls. The sense of being watched, of unseen eyes peering through the windows, grew stronger, despite the rational part of her mind urging her to dismiss it as paranoia. Vadim's confident demeanor, as he completed the task, contrasted sharply with Alice's growing discomfort. He seemed oblivious to the undercurrents of tension that had settled in the house, focused solely on the practicalities of bringing modern amenities to what had been a relic of the past. As darkness fully enveloped the village, Alice retreated to her room, the glow of a single electric lamp casting long shadows that danced eerily across the walls. She found herself longing for the simplicity of candlelight, where shadows held less menace and the unknown lurked just beyond the edge of sight. In the silence of that first electrified night, Alice struggled to reconcile the comfort of modernity with the ancient secrets that seemed to pulse beneath the surface of her grandmother's house. Each flicker of a light bulb threatened to reveal more than she was prepared to confront, stirring whispers of stories she had heard about the house and its dark history. As sleep eluded her, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that by bringing electricity to the old house, they had awakened something that had long slumbered in the shadows. And as she listened to the distant howl of a lone wolf echoing through the night, she wondered if they had unwittingly invited more than just light into their lives. Alice tossed and turned in her bed, unable to shake off the unease that had settled over her like a suffocating blanket. The room was bathed in the faint glow of the electric lamp, its light flickering occasionally, as if uncertain of its purpose in this old, unfamiliar house. Outside, the darkness pressed against the windows, hiding the secrets of the night. As she lay there, caught in that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, Alice's ears perked up at a faint sound drifting through the window pane. It was subtle at first, barely more than a whisper carried on the breeze. She strained her ears, listening intently, trying to discern its origin amidst the rustling of leaves and distant murmur of the wind. Then it came again, a soft scratching, like claws against wood, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down her spine. Heart pounding, Alice sat up in bed, her eyes darting to the window. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting eerie shadows on the floor. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone, half expecting to find a message from her mother or Vadim, reassuring her that everything was all right. But there was nothing. Summoning her courage, Alice tiptoed to the window and peered outside. The village lay quiet under the moon's silvery gaze, its streets empty and still. There were no signs of movement, no shadows flitting between the houses. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted, clinging to her skin like a chill. A wave of relief washed over her momentarily when she saw nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the sense of unease lingered, gnawing at her insides like a hungry beast. Morning brought little respite from the night's unrest. As Alice dressed, her mind kept returning to the disturbing sounds and the inexplicable fear that had gripped her in the darkness. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted when she noticed a dull ache in her chest. Curious, she reached up to touch the area beneath her nightshirt. Her fingers brushed against something unexpected, a tender, swollen lump nestled just above her heart. Panic surged through her veins as she explored further, feeling the unnatural hardness beneath her skin. The realization hit her with the force of a blow. There was a lump on her chest, and it was growing. Fear tightened its grip on Alice's heart as she tried to make sense of the ominous discovery. Thoughts raced through her mind. Could it be cancer? Or something far more sinister, lurking in the shadows of this cursed place? She knew she had to tell someone, to seek help. But as she glanced around the quiet room, the weight of solitude pressed down upon her. The thought of revealing her fear to her family, already burdened with their own worries, filled her with guilt. With trembling hands, Alice resolved to keep her discovery to herself for now. She couldn't afford to add to their anxieties, not when they were so close to leaving this place behind. But deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore the growing lump forever. Its presence was a haunting reminder that something dark and malevolent lurked beneath the surface of their seemingly peaceful visit. As the day wore on, Alice struggled to mask her fear behind a facade of normalcy. Yet, with each passing hour, the lump throbbed insistently, a constant reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden in this house of secrets. And as night fell once more, casting long shadows across the room, Alice lay awake, haunted by the knowledge that something sinister had taken root within her, paralleling the darkness that enveloped the house. Grandmother Maria appeared unusually pale and detached, her eyes distant and unfocused, as if gazing into a realm beyond the living. Alice couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that something had altered within her grandmother since their arrival. Once vibrant and spirited, Maria now moved with a slow deliberation that sent shivers down Alice's spine. The sense of foreboding only deepened when unexpected events unfolded outside. It was a quiet afternoon when Alice noticed her mother and younger brother returning from the village square, their faces etched with concern. As they entered the house, Alice's eyes darted to her mother's face and froze on the darkening bruise marring her cheek. "Mom, what happened?" Alice blurted out, unable to suppress her alarm. Her mother hesitated, her gaze flickering briefly to Vadim before she spoke. "It's nothing, just a small accident." But the words rang hollow, the excuse inadequate to explain the deepening worry etched into her mother's features. Alice's mind raced with questions, suspicions bubbling to the surface. She knew her mother too well to believe it was merely an accident. The bruise spoke of something more sinister lurking beneath the facade of their supposedly peaceful visit. As her mother retreated into the kitchen, Alice exchanged a troubled glance with Vadim, who stood nearby, his expression unreadable. The atmosphere in the house had shifted palpably, shadows dancing on the walls like silent witnesses to secrets untold. That night, sleep eluded Alice once again. Her thoughts churned with unease, tangled between her grandmother's unnatural demeanor and her mother's unexplained injury. Each creak of the old house seemed to echo with unseen threats, heightening her sense of vulnerability in this unfamiliar place. In the dim light of her room, Alice clutched her blanket tightly, seeking solace amidst the growing storm of uncertainty. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were entangled in a web of mysteries, each thread leading deeper into darkness. And as the hours dragged on, Alice wondered what other secrets this house held, and whether they would unravel before they could escape its haunting grip. As tensions escalated within the family, Vadim's behavior took a darker turn, veering into aggression that sent tremors through the already fragile peace of their stay in the village. His once composed demeanor now cracked under unseen pressures, his words laced with an unsettling edge that chilled Alice to the bone. It began with terse exchanges at the dinner table, where Vadim's steely gaze seemed to linger too long on Alice, his lips curling into a twisted semblance of a smile that conveyed more menace than warmth. The atmosphere around him grew heavy with unspoken threats, casting a pall over their interactions. Alice found herself tiptoeing around Vadim, unsure of what might trigger his volatile temper next. Her mother, sensing the mounting tension, urged Alice in hushed tones to avoid confrontation, to not provoke him further. It was a delicate dance of silence and avoidance, their conversations reduced to polite murmurs masking the turmoil simmering beneath the surface. In the quiet moments when Vadim was not present, Alice allowed herself to exhale the breath she'd been holding, her thoughts swirling with a mixture of fear and disgust at his unpredictable outbursts. She desperately clung to the hope that this storm of aggression would pass, that Vadim would revert to the man she once knew, dependable and caring. Yet each day brought new challenges, new slights from Vadim that left scars on their already strained family dynamics. Alice retreated into herself, seeking solace in the memories of their life before this ill-fated visit, where Vadim's temper had never darkened their doorstep. In the shadows of the old house, as the hours stretched into uneasy days, Alice grappled with the realization that their escape from this ominous place was not yet within reach. She yearned for her mother's promised return home, praying silently that Vadim's aggression would not escalate further, that they would endure until freedom beckoned once more. And amidst the whispers of the past and the palpable fear of the present, Alice clung to the fragile hope that they would survive this ordeal, scarred but intact, and that Vadim's storm would eventually dissipate, leaving them with wounds that time could heal. As the shadows of unease deepened around Alice, she couldn't shake the unsettling sight of the ambulance parked in the neighboring yard, its presence a stark reminder of the fragility of life in this somber village. Whispered conversations among neighbors hinted at tragedy, their voices hushed yet heavy with the weight of unspeakable events that lurked just beyond closed doors. Seeking solace from the mounting tension at home, Alice found herself drawn to Aunt Zoya, a weathered woman with eyes that bore the weight of years of secrets. Aunt Zoya, an acquaintance of Alice's mother from long ago, greeted her with a mixture of warmth and caution, as if navigating a delicate balance between candor and the veiled truths that hung in the air. In the dimly lit parlor of Aunt Zoya's modest home, shadows danced across weathered walls, casting fleeting glimpses of faded photographs and forgotten memories. Alice listened intently as Aunt Zoya spoke in hushed tones, her words weaving a tapestry of superstition and ancestral whispers. "Alice, you must understand," Aunt Zoya began, her voice a time-worn melody tinged with reverence and apprehension. "Your grandmother, Maria, possessed gifts that defy explanation. She was a keeper of secrets, a wielder of forces that transcend the mundane world we see." Alice's heart quickened at the mention of her grandmother's mystical abilities, the same grandmother who now seemed a haunting presence within the walls of their ancestral home. Images flashed before her mind's eye of eerie symbols etched on weathered doors, of hushed rumors among wary villagers. "Alice, these gifts, they pass through blood," Aunt Zoya continued, her gaze unwavering. "Your mother carries this legacy, as do you and your brother. It is a burden and a blessing, intertwined in ways we cannot fully grasp." The air in the room seemed to thicken with the weight of Aunt Zoya's revelations, each word a thread in the unraveling tapestry of Alice's understanding. She struggled to reconcile the grandmother she knew, frail yet resolute, with the enigmatic figure Aunt Zoya, painted a guardian of arcane knowledge, a custodian of ancient powers. As Alice left Aunt Zoya's home that evening, the shadows clung to her like whispered secrets, leaving her to ponder the tangled web of fate that bound her family to this place of mystery and foreboding. The stories of her grandmother's whispered prowess echoed in her mind, mingling with the palpable fear that now tinged her every thought. In the silence of the night, under the watchful gaze of distant stars, Alice wondered what other secrets lay buried beneath the surface of her family's history, and what role she was destined to play in unraveling the enigma that bound them to this haunted legacy. As Aunt Zoya's words echoed in Alice's mind, she wrestled with a torrent of conflicting emotions. The warning about her stepfather's obsession with her grandmother's sorceries weighed heavily on her thoughts, casting a shadow over the uneasy tranquility of the village. Initially resistant to Aunt Zoya's insights, Alice found herself on the brink of dismissing them as the ramblings of superstition and old wives' tales. Yet, as Alice paced through the narrow lanes of the village, her steps faltered with each haunting recollection of recent events. The symbols etched upon the door, the inexplicable bruises on her mother's face, each piece of the puzzle fit uneasily into Aunt Zoya's narrative of ancestral powers and malevolent forces. A gust of wind carried the whispers of distant voices, mingling with the rustling leaves that danced in the twilight. Alice's thoughts wandered back to Aunt Zoya's solemn visage, etched with the wisdom of generations and the burden of unspoken truths. Could it be true? Could her stepfather Vadim be unwittingly ensnared in a web of ancient magic, drawn inexorably toward a fate entwined with her grandmother's mystical legacy? The air grew chill as night descended upon the village, cloaking its inhabitants in a shroud of apprehension. Alice's heart quickened with a newfound urgency, a gnawing suspicion that the threads of fate were pulling her deeper into a realm where reality blurred with superstition. She yearned to dismiss it all, to retreat into the familiarity of disbelief, yet the marks on her mother's skin spoke louder than reason. Drawing a deep breath, Alice retraced her steps toward Aunt Zoya's weathered cottage, where the flickering glow of candlelight beckoned like a beacon in the encroaching darkness. She hesitated at the threshold, grappling with the weight of Aunt Zoya's prophecy and the unsettling realization that her family's safety may hinge on embracing the very truths she had tried to deny. Inside, Aunt Zoya waited, her gaze steady and knowing. With a tremulous voice, Alice spoke of her growing unease, of the signs that whispered of a hidden world entwined with her own. Aunt Zoya listened in silence, her expression a tapestry of empathy and resolve. Aunt Zoya finally spoke, her voice a quiet revelation in the stillness of the night. You must trust in the path that unfolds before you. The signs are clear, woven into the fabric of your family's story. Embrace your heritage, for in it lies the key to unraveling the darkness that shadows us. As the candle flame flickered in a dance of shadows, Alice felt a tremor of acceptance ripple through her soul. She could no longer turn away from the unsettling truths that beckoned her onward, into a realm where the boundaries between ordinary and extraordinary blurred with every passing moment. Leaving Aunt Zoya's cottage that night, Alice carried with her a newfound resolve to confront the looming specter of her stepfather's unwitting entanglement in her grandmother's arcane legacy. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty and peril, yet Alice knew that in facing the shadows of her family's past, she would find the strength to forge a future bathed in the light of understanding and redemption. As Alice walked through the narrow village streets, her mind a whirlwind of unsettling thoughts, she couldn't shake the gnawing fear that gripped her heart. The discovery of the ominous growth on her chest had been a chilling awakening, a stark reminder of the inexplicable events unfolding around her. Despite her trepidation, she pressed on, driven by a relentless curiosity and a desperate need for answers. Her steps led her to Olia, the enigmatic girl who seemed to hold a peculiar knowledge of the village's hidden secrets. Beneath the somber shade of an ancient oak tree, Alice found solace in Olia's presence, confiding in her the depths of her fears and the weight of her suspicions. Olia listened intently, her eyes flickering with an unsettling mix of knowing and concern. "I've heard the whispers too," she murmured, her voice barely more than a whisper carried on the breeze. These powers, they pass through bloodlines, through souls touched by the ancient arts. It's not just girls like us who feel their presence. Alice's pulse quickened at Olia's words, a chill creeping down her spine as she realized the implications. The village's secrets were woven into the very fabric of its existence, threads of magic and mystery entwined with the lives of its inhabitants, regardless of age or gender. "But what does it mean for me?" Alice asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Olia's gaze held a depth of understanding beyond her years. "It means you're part of something larger, something ancient and powerful," she replied solemnly. "The signs you've seen, the fears that haunt you, they're all connected to your family's past, to the legacy that binds us all." The words hung heavy in the air, mingling with the rustling of leaves and the distant murmur of the village. Alice felt a sense of both awe and dread settle over her as she contemplated the weight of Olia's revelations. The path ahead seemed fraught with peril and uncertainty, yet she knew deep within that turning back was no longer an option. With a silent nod of gratitude, Alice parted ways with Olia, her mind swirling with newfound determination. The journey to unravel the mysteries of her family's past had only just begun, and she knew that confronting the shadows that lurked within the village's ancient heart would demand courage beyond measure. As she walked away, the echoes of Olia's words reverberated in her mind, a haunting reminder of the intertwined fates that bound them together in a tale of darkness and destiny. Each step forward carried Alice deeper into the labyrinth of secrets, where the lines between reality and myth blurred with every revelation, beckoning her toward a truth she was both terrified and compelled to uncover. As Alice quickened her pace through the winding paths of the village, her thoughts darted anxiously to her younger brother. She couldn't shake the haunting realization that the mysterious forces at play could also ensnare him. Every step felt urgent now, driven by a fierce determination to understand and protect her family from the dark currents swirling around them. Her path soon crossed with Olia once more, their conversation turning to Alice's absent mother and the unsettling rumors surrounding witches. Beneath the shade of an ancient oak, their voices mingled with the rustling leaves as they delved into the murky depths of their shared fears. "I can't stop thinking about why Mom didn't come sooner," Alice admitted, her voice tinged with worry. "And what being a witch really means. Olia, do you think it's about power? Like having control over things, even if it comes with sacrifices?" Olia's gaze was solemn, her expression betraying a wisdom that belied her years. "It's more than just power," she replied softly, her words carrying a weight that hung heavy in the air. "It's about understanding the hidden currents of the world, about tapping into forces that others fear or misunderstand. But yes, there are always sacrifices. That's the price of wielding such ancient magic." Alice nodded, her mind racing with a mix of fascination and apprehension. The notion of her mother's delayed return gnawed at her, intertwined with the unsettling symbols and the inexplicable ailments that seemed to plague her family. The village's secrets felt like threads in a web, each discovery pulling her deeper into a labyrinth where truth and danger intertwined. "Will it affect my brother too?" Alice asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid of speaking the question aloud. Olia's gaze softened, a flicker of empathy crossing her features. It could, she admitted quietly. If the legacy passes through bloodlines, then he may not be immune to its influence. We have to be vigilant, Alice, and protect him as much as we can. The weight of Olia's words settled over Alice like a shroud. She felt a surge of protective instinct for her brother, coupled with a gnawing fear of the unknown that seemed to lurk around every corner of the village. As they parted ways once more, Alice carried with her a renewed determination to uncover the truth, no matter how unsettling or perilous the journey ahead might be. The echoes of their conversation lingered in her mind, mingling with the whispering wind and the distant hum of village life. In the heart of the ancient oak's shadow, she felt the stirrings of a power far older than herself, beckoning her to unravel the mysteries that bound her family to the enigmatic legacy of witches and their elusive secrets. As Alice retraced her steps homeward, the evening air grew cooler, a stark contrast to the warmth of her earlier conversations with Olia. Thoughts of Aunt Zoya's warnings and the unsettling discovery of her own affliction weighed heavily on her mind. The path seemed longer now, each footfall echoing in the quiet of the village night. Entering the familiar embrace of her grandmother's house, Alice couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. a sensation that prickled at the back of her neck. The dimly lit hallway stretched before her, casting elongated shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. In the stillness of her room, surrounded by the comforting familiarity of her belongings, Alice tossed and turned in her bed. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions and apprehensions, each thought weaving a tapestry of uncertainty and fear. The revelation of her grandmother's unnatural pallor and indifferent demeanor haunted her, leaving an unsettling imprint on her psyche. She pondered the implications of inheriting her grandmother's arcane abilities, powers that held both allure and menace. What would it mean for her family? Could she control such forces, or would they control her? The weight of responsibility pressed down upon her, a burden that threatened to overwhelm her fragile resolve. As the hours ticked by, the darkness outside deepened, enveloping the house in an eerie silence broken only by the occasional creak of aging timbers. Alice's thoughts circled back to Olia's words about sacrifices and the enigmatic nature of witchcraft. What sacrifices would she have to make to harness this power? Would she have the strength to resist its darker temptations? Eventually, exhaustion began to overtake her troubled mind. With a heavy heart and eyes still filled with unshed tears, Alice succumbed to sleep's restless embrace. Dreams flickered at the edges of her consciousness, shadows that mirrored her fears and hopes, mingling in a surreal dance that mirrored the uncertain path ahead. The night wore on, and in the quiet of her slumber, Alice drifted between fleeting moments of peace and turbulent visions of a future fraught with unknown perils. The clock ticked relentlessly onward, marking the passage of time in a house where secrets whispered in the walls and the legacy of witches cast a long, foreboding shadow over her restless dreams. Alice jolted awake to a piercing, unearthly wail that echoed through the stillness of the night. It clawed at her senses, tearing through the thin veil of sleep with primal urgency. Heart pounding in her chest, she sat upright in bed, disoriented and trembling. The sound emanated from her grandmother's room down the hall, where shadows danced ominously in the dim moonlight filtering through lace curtains. Dread crept up Alice's spine as she hesitated, the air thick with an inexplicable foreboding. Every instinct urged her to stay put, yet an unshakable curiosity and concern compelled her forward. With each step down the corridor, the atmosphere grew heavier, suffused with an unsettling tension that seemed to seep from the very walls. The door to her grandmother's room stood ajar, creaking softly on its hinges as if beckoning her into a realm of darkness she dared not enter. Pushing the door open slightly, Alice's breath caught in her throat at the sight before her. Her grandmother lay in bed, a frail figure shrouded in shadows, her once lively features now contorted in a grotesque mask of age and distress. Deep lines etched her face overnight, a stark contrast to the woman Alice had known just the day before. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that froze Alice in place. It was the wild, frenzied look in her grandmother's eyes, a stark departure from the calm demeanor Alice had grown accustomed to. The room seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, an aura of darkness that clung to the air like a suffocating fog. Her grandmother's hands trembled violently, as if struggling against unseen forces, clawing at the bed covers with desperate intensity. The unearthly wail came again, piercing Alice's eardrums with a primal fear that rooted her to the spot. Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of sorrow and terror at witnessing this sudden, inexplicable transformation. Frozen in place, Alice could only watch in helpless horror as her grandmother's tormented cries filled the room, a chilling reminder of forces beyond her comprehension. The familiar room had become a chamber of nightmares, where reality blurred with the macabre fantasies of a mind unhinged. And amidst it all, Alice felt a deep, gnawing fear not just for herself, but for what this transformation meant. Was it the onset of madness, or something far more sinister, something tied to the whispered secrets of witchcraft and the warnings of Aunt Zoya? As the night wore on, the haunting cries faded into exhausted sobs, leaving Alice standing alone in the suffocating silence of that cursed room. The weight of her grandmother's transformation hung heavy in the air, casting a long, ominous shadow over the fragile threads of Alice's sanity. Alice and her brother ventured out of the house, seeking refuge from the unsettling horrors that had unfolded within. With a heavy heart and a mind still reeling from the night's events, She guided Ilya towards their only sanctuary, the car, parked just outside the ominous walls of their grandmother's once familiar home. As they settled into the cramped interior of the car, Alice felt a fleeting sense of relief mingled with the weight of exhaustion. The night had been a relentless torrent of fear and confusion, leaving her drained and yearning for solace. She glanced at Ilya, his small form curled up in the seat beside her, a stark reminder of the innocence that needed protection amidst the encroaching darkness. The car became their makeshift haven, a cocoon of safety amidst the looming shadows that stretched from the house they dared not enter again. With a blanket draped over Ilya and a dim overhead light casting a feeble glow, Alice sought solace in the quiet murmurs of the night and the comforting presence of her brother's steady breathing. Morning crept upon them like a reluctant guest, its arrival tinged with the lingering dread of what lay ahead. Alice stirred as sunlight filtered through the windshield, casting gentle patterns on their tired faces. She glanced towards the house, its facade now an unsettling reminder of the events that had unfolded under its roof. Moments later, her mother and Vadim emerged from the house, their footsteps heavy with weariness. Alice's heart sank at the sight of them, their faces etched with lines of exhaustion and worry that mirrored her own inner turmoil. Despite the strained atmosphere, they extended a hesitant invitation for Alice and Ilya to join them inside for breakfast. Reluctantly leaving the shelter of their refuge, Alice guided Ilya towards the house once more, her footsteps hesitant against the backdrop of a morning that held no promises of respite. Each creak of the floorboards beneath her feet echoed the unease that gripped her soul, a silent reminder of the tenuous balance between normalcy and the encroaching unknown. Inside, the air was heavy with unspoken fears and unanswered questions, yet the facade of normalcy persisted in the mundane rituals of breakfast preparation. Alice watched her mother move with a quiet determination, her movements a stark contrast to the turmoil that raged beneath the surface. Vadim's presence loomed with a tense silence, a palpable reminder of the unresolved tensions that simmered within their fractured family dynamic. As they gathered around the table, the morning light filtering through lace curtains cast fleeting moments of calm amidst the storm. Yet the shadows of the night lingered in the corners of Alice's mind, their presence a haunting reminder of the horrors she had witnessed and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The breakfast passed in strained conversation and forced smiles, a fragile facade masking the turmoil that threatened to consume them all. Alice stole glances at her mother and Vadim, their weary eyes betraying the weight of secrets they dared not share. In the quiet moments between bites, she wondered if they, too, sensed the impending darkness that loomed on the horizon. For Alice, the morning brought no respite, only a fleeting glimpse of normalcy amidst the suffocating grip of fear and uncertainty. As the day unfolded, she knew that the events of the night had irrevocably altered their lives, casting a shadow that stretched beyond the confines of their grandmother's haunted home. Grandmother's attempts to pass on her powers to Alice escalated into a nightmarish struggle, veiled behind the thin guise of familial ties. As the hours waned and darkness settled, the air in the house grew thick with anticipation and unspoken dread. Alice, caught in the crossfire of supernatural inheritance and maternal protection, found herself teetering on the edge of a precipice she could scarcely comprehend. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows across the walls, illuminating the intensity etched on her mother's face as she stood defiant against the matriarch's relentless pursuit of legacy. Each moment stretched taut with the weight of unspoken truths and the looming threat of Vadim's watchful presence, a guardian turned unwitting jailer in their clandestine plans. Whispers of escape threaded through the stifling air, whispered promises of freedom entwined with the palpable fear of what they might leave behind. Alice clung to her mother's resolve like a lifeline in the swirling chaos, their shared determination to flee this haunted legacy igniting a fragile spark of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. With the night draped around them like a shroud, they bided their time, navigating the treacherous currents of Vadim's suspicions and grandmother's fading strength. Each creak of the floorboards beneath their feet echoed the urgency of their plight, a silent plea for liberation from the suffocating embrace of ancestral ties that bound them to this forsaken place. In whispered conspiracies and stolen glances, they mapped out their escape route under the cover of night, a precarious dance between liberation and the ominous specter of retribution. Alice stole fleeting moments of solace in the whispered reassurances of her mother, their shared determination a beacon amidst the encroaching shadows. As the hour of escape drew near, the house seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, its walls whispering tales of generations past and the price paid for supernatural gifts. Alice's heart pounded in rhythm with the pulse of impending freedom, each beat a defiant declaration against the forces that sought to ensnare them in this labyrinth of secrets and sorrows. When the moment finally arrived, they moved with the quiet resolve of fugitives, slipping through the darkness with the weight of their choices heavy upon them. The night sky stretched above them like a canvas of endless possibilities, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic confines of grandmother's haunted home. Together, mother and daughter embarked on a journey fraught with uncertainty, but buoyed by the promise of a new beginning beyond the reach of spectral hands and whispered curses. As they disappeared into the night, the echoes of their footsteps mingled with the fading whispers of the house, a testament to their courage in the face of insurmountable odds. For Alice, the night held not just the promise of escape, but a reckoning with the legacy that threatened to consume her. In the silent expanse of the open road, she glimpsed a future untethered from the shadows of the past, where the weight of inherited powers could no longer dictate her fate. Alice and her brother spent the day outdoors, seeking refuge from the ominous atmosphere that pervaded their grandmother's home. They wandered through the familiar streets of the village, the warmth of the sun offering a stark contrast to the chill that lingered in their hearts. With each step, Alice's mind raced with worry, a gnawing fear that her mother might once again retract her promise to leave. As they walked, their path led them past a quaint cottage where Aunt Zoya resided. Alice noticed the elderly woman sitting on the roadside, her shoulders heaving with silent sobs. Intrigued and concerned, Alice approached her cautiously, the air thick with unspoken grief and the lingering scent of impending change. Aunt Zoya looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and weary, but softened at the sight of Alice's concern. She explained through choked words that help would arrive tomorrow to repair the roof, for it was already too late today. Alice listened intently, sensing a deeper meaning in Aunt Zoya's words, a resonance with the unresolved tensions that haunted her own family. Their conversation meandered into the realm of ancestral legacies and whispered secrets, Aunt Zoya's voice trembling with the weight of unspoken truths. She spoke of the intertwined destinies that bound Alice's family to this village, a tapestry woven with threads of mysticism and sacrifice. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone path, Alice felt a strange kinship with Aunt Zoya, a shared understanding of the burdens carried in silence. Here, amidst the quiet murmurs of the village and the distant echo of approaching footsteps, Alice found a fleeting sense of solace, a respite from the tumult that awaited her at grandmother's house. Yet beneath the fragile veneer of tranquility, the unspoken question loomed large: would tomorrow's promise of repair bring more than just structural stability to Aunt Zoya's cottage? Would it herald a chance for Alice and her family to mend their fractured bonds and escape the looming shadows of their haunted past? As the day drew to a close, Alice and her brother lingered a while longer in the fading light, their thoughts entwined with the whispers of change carried on the evening breeze. Tomorrow awaited with its own uncertainties, but for now, in the embrace of Aunt Zoya's weary gaze and the quiet solidarity of their shared understanding, Alice found a glimmer of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. The night crept in with an eerie stillness, broken only by the faint patter of rain against the car windows where Alice and her brother, Ilya, sought refuge. Nestled in the cramped confines of their vehicle, the air was thick with tension and anticipation, their hearts beating in sync with the rhythmic drumming of the rain. Alice's mother, hushed and resolute, leaned in close, her voice a whisper in the darkness. She imparted a plan to Alice, a plan forged from desperation and fear, that they would depart silently into the night as soon as Vadim succumbed to sleep's embrace. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one stretched taut with uncertainty. Alice's senses heightened, acutely aware of every rustle of leaves and every distant rumble of thunder that echoed the turmoil within her. But amidst the heavy silence, fatigue claimed its toll, coaxing her into a restless slumber fraught with fragmented dreams. The piercing shriek of a headache jolted Alice awake, her mind scrambling to grasp the reality that unfolded around her. Panic seized her as she scanned the cramped interior of the car, her frantic gaze settling on the vacant seat beside her where Ilya had been moments ago. Heart pounding in her chest, Alice flung open the car door, uncaring of the torrents of rain that drenched her within seconds. The night enveloped her in a chilling embrace as she staggered into the downpour, her voice raw with desperation as she called out into the darkness, searching frantically for any sign of her younger brother. The rain fell in relentless sheets, blurring her vision and soaking her to the bone, yet Alice pressed on, driven by a primal fear that threatened to consume her. Images of sinister whispers and foreboding shadows flickered at the edge of her consciousness, heightening the surreal nightmare that had become their reality. With each passing moment, the woods around her seemed to close in, the branches reaching out like gnarled fingers grasping for her sanity. Every rustle of leaves and every flicker of movement in the shadows sent a shiver down her spine, a chilling reminder of the unknown dangers that lurked in the darkness. Time blurred into a frantic whirlwind of emotions as Alice's cries echoed through the desolate night, a desperate plea swallowed by the relentless storm. The weight of guilt and fear bore down upon her, a suffocating burden that threatened to crush her resolve. Yet just as hope threatened to slip through her trembling fingers, a faint cry pierced the tumultuous air. Alice's heart leaped as she followed the sound, stumbling through the rain-soaked underbrush until she found Ilya huddled against a tree, trembling and tear-streaked but miraculously unharmed. Relief flooded through Alice as she gathered her brother into her arms, shielding him from the storm's fury with a fierce determination. The night whispered secrets of untold perils, but in that fleeting moment of reunion, amidst the relentless downpour and the looming shadows, Alice found a fragile solace, a beacon of hope that flickered defiantly against the encroaching darkness. As they returned to the shelter of the car, their clothes clinging wetly to their chilled bodies, Alice clung to Ilya tightly, their shared ordeal binding them closer than ever before. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with newfound resolve, Alice knew that their night of terror had only begun, the looming specter of their grandmother's house and its haunting mysteries casting a long, chilling shadow over their uncertain path ahead. The scene unfolded in a surreal tableau of horror and despair as Alice pushed open the familiar door to her home, only to be greeted by an unsettling stillness that hung heavy in the air. A foreboding chill crept down her spine as she stepped cautiously into the dimly lit interior, her eyes darting nervously across the familiar yet now menacing surroundings. Her mother's lifeless form lay sprawled on the cold floor, an image that seared into Alice's mind with cruel clarity. Shock and disbelief coursed through her veins, freezing her in place as she struggled to comprehend the horrifying reality before her. The room seemed to spin, the shadows dancing mockingly around her, amplifying the silence that suffocated the once comforting space. Vadim stood motionless by the window, an unsettling figure bathed in the pale moonlight, his gaze fixed on something unseen beyond the glass. Alice's voice caught in her throat, an anguished cry barely escaping her lips as she stumbled forward, her trembling fingers reaching out to touch her mother's still form, searching desperately for any sign of life. But the chill of death was palpable, haunting every corner of the room, echoing in the hollow emptiness that now filled Alice's heart. Tears blurred her vision as she turned to Vadim, her voice trembling with accusation and raw anguish. Yet he remained eerily indifferent, a silent sentinel guarding secrets buried deep within the shadows of their shattered reality. With trembling resolve, Alice turned towards her grandmother, her desperation clawing at the edges of her sanity. Questions spilled from her lips in a torrent of fear and confusion, demanding answers that only the aged woman could provide. But instead of solace or reassurance, her grandmother's response was cryptic, an unsettling offer tinged with ominous implications. Refusing the offered object with a surge of instinctual dread, Alice recoiled, her heart pounding with primal fear. In that moment of stark clarity, she knew she could trust no one but herself. With a gut-wrenching cry, she fled into the cold embrace of the night, the weight of grief and betrayal pressing heavily upon her shoulders. Outside, the world seemed distorted, a nightmarish labyrinth where every shadow concealed unseen dangers. Rain continued to fall in a relentless downpour, mingling with Alice's tears as she ran, her breath ragged and her mind racing with the horrors she had witnessed. Each step carried her further from the suffocating confines of her grandmother's house, yet closer to the harrowing truth that awaited her in the darkness. As she stumbled blindly through the winding streets, her thoughts whirled with fragments of memory and whispered warnings. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, each passing moment unraveling the threads of her once ordinary life. With every heartbeat, the weight of her mother's absence bore down upon her, a crushing burden that threatened to consume her fragile resolve. Yet amidst the chaos and despair, a flicker of determination ignited within Alice's heart. She knew she could not allow herself to succumb to fear or despair, not when the answers she sought lay shrouded in the enigmatic depths of her family's secrets. Steeling herself against the looming darkness, she vowed to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. With each fleeting moment, the night grew colder and more unforgiving, but Alice pressed on, driven by an unwavering resolve to unravel the sinister tapestry that bound her fate to that of her family. The road ahead stretched endlessly before her, fraught with peril and uncertainty, yet she knew that her journey had only just begun, a journey that would test her courage, unravel her deepest fears, and lead her inexorably towards the chilling revelation awaiting her in the shadows. Under the relentless assault of raindrops that seemed to echo her tumultuous thoughts, Alice's trembling fingers closed around the rough wooden handle of the axe, its weight a reassuring anchor in the storm of uncertainty that raged within her. With every step towards the looming silhouette of her home, her resolve hardened, driven by a primal instinct to protect her brother and confront the horrors that lurked within. The door creaked ominously as Alice pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit hallway that stretched like a foreboding labyrinth before her. Her breath caught in her throat as she advanced cautiously, the rhythmic drumming of rain against the windows intensifying the tension that hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, Vadim emerged from the shadows, his figure silhouetted against the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of defiance and unease as they locked onto Alice's determined gaze, the axe held resolutely in her trembling grasp. "Step back," she commanded, her voice quivering with a blend of fear and determination. "I need to find my brother. Now." For a fleeting moment, Vadim hesitated, his features contorting with a mixture of resignation and lingering hostility. Yet, under the weight of Alice's unwavering gaze and the primal threat posed by the axe, he slowly yielded, stepping aside with an unsettling silence that spoke volumes. Heart pounding in her chest, Alice pressed forward, her footsteps echoing down the corridor like a drumbeat of defiance. Every shadow seemed to twist and writhe with unseen menace, each step bringing her closer to the heart of the mystery that had engulfed her family. Finally, she reached the door to her grandmother's room, its aged wood weathered by years of secrets and shadows. With a trembling hand, Alice pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest against the intrusion into the sanctum of ancient fears. Inside, the room was shrouded in an eerie stillness, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs and ancient whispers. Her grandmother sat hunched in a corner, her frail form illuminated by the flickering flame of a single candle. Her eyes, once sharp with wisdom, now held a haunted emptiness that sent shivers down Alice's spine. "Where is he?" Alice demanded, her voice ringing with a mixture of desperation and accusation. "What have you done with my brother?" The old woman's lips curled into a faint smile, a chilling echo of a time when her laughter had filled these walls with warmth. "He is safe," she murmured cryptically, her voice a whisper carried on the winds of forgotten promises. "Safer than you know." Alice's grip tightened on the axe, her resolve steeling against the unsettling calm that enveloped her grandmother's presence. She knew she had to tread carefully, each word and gesture a delicate dance on the edge of an abyss that threatened to swallow her whole. "Tell me," she pressed, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "Tell me everything." The room seemed to hold its breath as her grandmother's gaze bore into her soul, a silent testament to the weight of generations of secrets and sacrifices. Slowly, haltingly, the old woman began to speak, her words weaving a tapestry of ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge that stretched back beyond memory. As the night wore on, Alice listened with a mixture of horror and fascination, each revelation pulling her deeper into a labyrinth of darkness that threatened to consume everything she held dear. Yet amidst the shadows, she glimpsed flickers of truth, threads of a destiny entwined with powers beyond her comprehension. When dawn finally broke, painting the world in hues of hesitant hope, Alice emerged from the room with a heavy heart and a mind burdened by newfound knowledge. She knew the journey was far from over, the path ahead fraught with dangers she could scarcely imagine. But for now, she had found her brother, his slumber undisturbed by the storms that had ravaged their lives. And as she led him out into the uncertain light of a new day, Alice knew that she carried with her not just the weight of a family's legacy, but the courage to confront the darkness that awaited them all. Alice's desperate attempts to break through the ceiling with the axe and crowbar yielded only frustration. Each swing reverberated through the house like a futile cry against the encroaching darkness that threatened to consume her world. The iron barrier hidden within the structure seemed impenetrable, mocking her efforts with its silent defiance. Gasping for breath, heart hammering against her ribs, Alice stumbled out into the drenched embrace of the night. Rain poured down in relentless sheets, blurring her vision as she raced through the slippery grounds, calling out her brother's name into the tumultuous void. The barn loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the storm-racked sky. With trembling hands, Alice flung open its heavy doors, the smell of damp earth and hay mingling with her frantic breaths. Shadows danced in the flickering light of her phone's flashlight, each corner a potential hiding place for the brother she had sworn to protect. Ilya, she screamed, the word tearing from her throat in a desperate plea that echoed off the wooden walls. Her footsteps echoed hollowly in the empty space as she searched every corner, every nook and cranny, but found only silence and the weight of her own fears. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault, a merciless reminder of the forces that conspired against her. With trembling fingers, Alice retrieved her phone from her pocket, its screen a beacon of faint hope in the gloom. She dialed frantically, each ring swallowed by the howling wind and the dispassionate silence that greeted her on the other end. No signal, she muttered, her voice tinged with despair as she stared at the lifeless device. Tears mingled with raindrops on her cheeks as she fought against the suffocating sense of isolation that threatened to engulf her. Time blurred into a relentless blur of frantic searching and unanswered calls, each passing moment a cruel reminder of her helplessness in the face of an unseen menace. With every passing second, Alice's resolve hardened, fueled by a stubborn determination to find her brother and protect him from whatever darkness lurked in the shadows of their shattered world. Yet, as the storm raged on and the night stretched endlessly before her, she knew that the true battle lay not just in the search for Ilya, but in the unyielding struggle to preserve the fragile flicker of hope that burned within her heart. As Alice stormed back into the house, her nerves frayed and adrenaline coursing through her veins, she found herself once again face to face with Vadim, his expression a mixture of defiance and wary apprehension. Without hesitation, she confronted him, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "Where is Ilya?" Alice demanded, her eyes blazing with intensity as she fixed her gaze on Vadim. His response was a cold, calculated silence, each second ticking by like a taunting echo of her desperation. But it was the figure of her grandmother that drew Alice's attention next, the frail form standing defiantly in the dimly lit room. The old woman's eyes bore into Alice's soul, her gaze unnervingly steady, as if she knew the turmoil raging within her granddaughter. "I want answers," Alice growled, her hands trembling as she clutched the axe tightly. "Tell me where he is." Her grandmother's response was cryptic, spoken in a voice that carried the weight of centuries-old secrets. "I can help you," she murmured, her words slicing through the tension like a knife. "But you must accept what I offer." Alice hesitated, torn between the primal urge to protect her brother at all costs and the unsettling allure of the power her grandmother promised. She knew the stakes were high, that every decision could mean life or death for Ilya. In a moment of raw, unbridled fury and desperation, Alice made her choice. With a scream that echoed through the stillness of the house, she swung the axe with all her might. The blade bit into flesh and bone, a sickening crunch mingling with the sound of her own ragged breaths. Blood splattered across the floor, a stark reminder of the irreversible act she had committed. Tremors racked her body as she stared down at her grandmother's lifeless form, the weight of her actions settling heavily on her shoulders. But as she stood there, trembling and covered in gore, something shifted within Alice. A surge of energy coursed through her veins, a strange and unsettling sensation of power awakening deep within. She felt it in her bones, in the very core of her being, the knowledge and strength of generations past, passed down in a brutal and unexpected exchange. She staggered back, dropping the axe with a clatter that reverberated through the silence. The room seemed to pulse around her, shadows dancing in the flickering light, as if celebrating the transformation that had just taken place. For Alice, there was no turning back. She had crossed a threshold into a world where darkness and light blurred into a chilling reality. With bloodied hands and a heart heavy with the weight of her choices, she knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril and uncertainty. But in that moment, standing amidst the aftermath of her grandmother's demise, Alice realized with a chilling clarity that she had just taken her first step into a destiny she had never imagined, a destiny where the line between hero and villain, protector and destroyer, would forever remain blurred. With the grim deed done, Alice stood amidst the haunting aftermath, her mind racing with a potent mix of horror and exhilaration. The power she had unleashed coursed through her veins like wildfire, tingling with an intensity that bordered on the surreal. There, in the dimly lit room, she summoned her newfound abilities with a grim determination. Using the arcane strength that now surged within her, Alice lifted her grandmother's lifeless body with an eerie ease, her hands steady despite the morbid weight. With a chilling resolve, she dragged the body towards the basement, each step echoing with a macabre rhythm. The stairs creaked under the burden, almost in protest against the grim fate that awaited the old woman. Upon reaching the cellar's threshold, Alice hesitated for a fleeting moment, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Yet, driven by a deep-seated fury and the need for retribution, she pushed forward. With a forceful shove, she sent her grandmother's body tumbling down into the darkness below, where it would languish in a slow and agonizing demise. But Alice's journey into the depths of her newfound power was far from over. Turning her attention to Vadim, whose presence had become a suffocating reminder of past atrocities, she unleashed a wave of commanding energy. Her voice rang out with an authority that belied her years, casting him out of the house with an imperious gesture. As the storm raged outside, echoing the tumult within her soul, Alice ventured into the foreboding woods that surrounded their isolated home. Guided by an instinct sharpened by fear and determination, she navigated through the labyrinthine paths until she stumbled upon a haunting sight, a motionless figure lying amidst the underbrush. Heart pounding in her chest, Alice knelt beside her unconscious brother, his frail form a stark contrast to the menacing shadows that loomed overhead. She brushed aside his damp hair with trembling fingers, relief flooding her senses as she confirmed his shallow breaths. The relief was fleeting, overshadowed by the realization of what she had become and the daunting path ahead. Yet, as she cradled Elia's limp body in her arms, a flicker of hope ignited within Alice, a fragile ember amidst the darkness that threatened to consume her. With the echoes of her grandmother's demise still reverberating in her mind, she knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with peril and uncertainty. But in that solitary moment, amidst the whispering leaves and the ghostly murmur of the wind, Alice found solace in the fragile bond of siblinghood and the fragile promise of a new dawn, a promise she would fiercely protect with the strength she had unwittingly embraced. As dawn broke over the horizon, Alice, with Ilya and Olga by her side, cautiously approached their home. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of uncertainty hanging in the misty morning air. The trio had returned from their harrowing journey through the woods, their minds burdened with the weight of recent events. At the threshold of their once familiar abode, they were met with an unexpected sight. Aunt Zoya stood there, flanked by two men whose faces bore expressions of mingled dread and disbelief. Their eyes widened as they recognized the absence of the matriarch who had cast a long shadow over their lives. The revelation of the grandmother's demise struck them with a chilling realization they were face to face with the aftermath of a dark and inexplicable chapter. Aunt Zoya's trembling voice broke the uneasy silence that enveloped them. She attempted to speak, to find words that could possibly make sense of the horror that had unfolded under their roof. But Alice's gaze was steely, her resolve unyielding, as she clutched the worn handle of the axe, the very tool that had become a symbol of her newfound strength and defiance. The tension escalated as they moved deeper into the house, where Vadim, once a looming threat, now stood as a barrier in the narrow hallway leading to the grandmother's room. His posture, once intimidating, faltered under the weight of Alice's unwavering stare and the threat of the axe she wielded with a steady hand. With measured steps and a voice that carried the echoes of authority, Alice demanded passage. Her words reverberated off the walls, mingling with the nervous murmurs of Aunt Zoya and the men who flanked her. Vadim hesitated, his eyes flickering between defiance and fear, before finally relenting under the weight of Alice's determined gaze. The door to the grandmother's room creaked open, revealing a scene frozen in time, a room that bore witness to both the supernatural and the mortal struggles that had unfolded within its confines. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the morning light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. The air was heavy with the scent of herbs and decay, a testament to the arcane rituals and unseen battles that had played out there. Alice stepped forward, her heart pounding in rhythm with the lingering storm outside. Her eyes swept over the room, searching for answers amidst the relics of her grandmother's arcane legacy. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the distant sounds of the awakening forest and the muffled sobs of Aunt Zoya, who stood frozen in the doorway. As the morning sun cast its feeble rays upon the scene of turmoil and revelation, Alice's mind raced with the enormity of what lay ahead. The confrontation with Vadim was but a prelude to the daunting task of navigating a world forever altered by the awakening of her own powers and the legacy of her grandmother's dark secrets. Yet amidst the shadows and uncertainty, Alice found a flicker of resolve, a resolve tempered by the bonds of family, the weight of responsibility, and the knowledge that she now wielded powers beyond comprehension. With Ilya and Olga at her side, she stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that their journey had only just begun in this chilling tale of defiance and redemption. Alice's futile attempts to break through the ceiling with axe and crowbar only intensified her frustration. Each strike reverberated through the cramped attic space, echoing her desperation and mounting rage. But the iron barrier stubbornly held, mocking her efforts with its immovable resistance. In a frenzy of panic and dread, Alice raced through the familiar yet now ominous corridors of her home. She checked every corner, every shadowy alcove where her brother Ilya could be hiding or trapped. The barn, the backyard, even the neighboring houses offered no solace. Her calls for help fell on deaf ears, met with closed doors and drawn curtains, a stark reflection of the isolation that had engulfed their once peaceful village. With trembling hands, Alice finally stumbled upon an old telephone. The plastic felt cold against her clammy palms as she dialed frantically, praying for a lifeline amidst the encroaching darkness. But the line remained dead, a cruel testament to the forces that conspired against her. Returning to the heart of the eerie stillness that permeated the house, Alice confronted her grandmother once more. Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and defiance as she demanded answers about Ilya's whereabouts. The old woman, shrouded in an aura of ancient knowledge and sinister calm, met Alice's gaze with an unsettling serenity. In a voice that carried the weight of generations, the grandmother proposed a chilling bargain, a pact forged in desperation and darkened by the promise of power. She offered Alice her own formidable abilities in exchange for Ilya's life, weaving a web of promises that entwined the fate of her brother with the legacy of their bloodline. The air thickened with unspoken threats and unspeakable choices as Alice grappled with the enormity of the decision before her. To accept meant embracing the very darkness that had claimed her grandmother's soul, yet to refuse risked losing the only chance to save her brother from an unknown fate. With each passing moment, the shadows deepened around them, enveloping the room in a veil of uncertainty and foreboding. Alice stood at the precipice of a choice that would irrevocably alter the course of their lives, a choice between the desperate love for her brother and the chilling allure of newfound power. As the storm outside intensified, mirroring the tumult within her heart, Alice felt the weight of her decision pressing down upon her. The echoes of her grandmother's offer reverberated through the cavernous silence, casting a pall over their familial bond and the fragile hope that had sustained them through the darkest of nights. In a surge of rage-fueled determination, Alice swung the axe with a force born of desperation and horror. The blade cleaved through the air and found its mark with chilling precision, burying deep into her grandmother's frail form. The sickening crunch of bone and the visceral spray of blood painted a gruesome tableau in the dimly lit room, punctuated by Alice's anguished cries echoing off the walls. As her grandmother's life ebbed away, Alice felt a surge of power, raw and primal, coursing through her veins. It was as if a dam had burst within her, unleashing abilities she had never imagined possessing. Objects trembled and shifted at her unspoken command, and the thoughts of others flickered in her mind like faint whispers on the wind. With a grim resolve, Alice used her newfound abilities to lift the lifeless body of her grandmother. She carried it with eerie calmness down to the musty depths of the cellar, where shadows clung to the walls like tendrils of despair. Lowering the body onto the cold stone floor, Alice's eyes burned with an unsettling mix of vengeance and sorrow. She intended for her grandmother to suffer, to linger in agony as payback for the horrors she had inflicted upon their family. Flushed with a strange blend of triumph and dread, Alice emerged from the cellar and confronted Vadim with a steely determination that belied her years. The aura of newfound power enveloped her like a protective cloak, empowering her words and bolstering her resolve. Vadim, caught off guard by the intensity in her gaze and the unyielding force in her voice, yielded to her command without protest. With Vadim banished from their home, Alice ventured into the wilderness that surrounded their secluded dwelling. Rain-soaked and breathless, she scoured the dense forest until, at last, she stumbled upon the limp form of her brother Ilya. His body lay still and pale against the damp earth, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths that spoke of unconsciousness rather than peace. Relief flooded through Alice as she knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she gently cradled his head. Despite the bruises and the pallor of his skin, Ilya's presence reassured her that, against all odds, they had survived the nightmarish ordeal. With each beat of his heart beneath her touch, Alice felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps their fractured family could find a way to heal, to rebuild amidst the ruins left by their harrowing journey through darkness. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting a pale light upon their weary forms, Alice clung to her brother's side with a fierce protectiveness. The woods whispered secrets of a world forever changed, where shadows danced with unseen forces and the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Yet, amidst the lingering echoes of despair, Alice found solace in the fragile bond of sibling love and the strength she had unearthed within herself, a strength forged in the crucible of loss and survival. Together they faced the uncertain path ahead, guided by the flickering light of hope and the haunting echoes of a night they would never forget. As Alice and Ilya trudged wearily back to their home, the air around them hung heavy with the weight of recent horrors. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a damp chill that seeped into their bones, a stark reminder of the tumultuous night they had endured. Upon reaching the familiar threshold of their once secure sanctuary, Alice sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Aunt Zoya, flanked by two solemn men, stood at a distance, their faces etched with fear and disbelief. They exchanged furtive glances as if grappling with the unsettling truth that the witch who had held sway over their lives was now no more. Despite the relief of seeing Aunt Zoya and the others acknowledge the absence of the grandmother's presence, Alice's heart sank with the realization that the witch's dark legacy persisted. The heart of the witch continued to beat beneath the floorboards, a haunting reminder of the unnatural forces that had ensnared her family. Inside, the house seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting to exhale the lingering traces of malevolent energy that had permeated its walls. Alice knew that the days ahead would be fraught with challenges and reckonings. The burden of her newfound powers weighed heavily upon her, their origin intertwined with the death of the grandmother she had once feared and now vanquished. As she guided Ilya to a quiet corner, shielding him from the unsettling sights and sounds that still echoed within their home, Alice braced herself for the trials that lay ahead. She understood that the darkness they had faced would not easily fade, that its tendrils would continue to weave through their lives, demanding courage and resilience. In the days to come, Alice would confront the aftermath of their ordeal with a steely resolve born of survival and the indomitable bond she shared with her brother. Together, they would navigate a world forever altered by the revelations of magic and menace lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary existence. With the witch's presence extinguished, Alice had triumphed over the forces that had sought to destroy her family. Yet, as she gazed out into the uncertain horizon, she knew that their journey was far from over. The heartbeat beneath the floorboards served as a grim reminder, a testament to the enduring legacy of the witch and the uncharted path that lay ahead for Alice and Elia.